Yeah, it's nice to be back with you. We're live from Johannesburg. This is Newsroom. Of course, we're dealing with many issues here in South Africa right now. Of course, the important one of us is the policy conference that's gone on and all the information that's coming out. It's interesting, isn't it?
Well, it's getting to a close today, Eben, but one of the key issues that came out of that policy conference was white monopoly capital.
Yeah, Kendall, were you surprised about the rejection by the majority members?
No, I wasn't. There were a lot of things that I was hoping to see in this, and a robust debate about WMC was one of them.
Yeah, that's the question we ask you. This term that's caused such a lot of consternation here in South Africa. Are you surprised that the ANC rejected the notion of white monopoly capital? Of course, we saw 9 out of 11 committees reject this notion. Obviously, we've got lots of tweets coming in.
Yeah, Dr. Prince Shaka says, not surprised at all. WMC is a weapon of the losing and weak camp in the ANC factional battle. Rejection is triumph over good over evil.
Onuke Christian says, who is afraid of the white communities in South Africa?
Interesting question. This one from Dupants, who says to us, 90% of those comrades don't even know what that is exactly. It sounds nice to say, I guess. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Of course, the other interesting point that came out was the one around the implementation. It's great to have this policy conference, and obviously it's great to have the best policies and even the best constitutions in the world. But you need to implement, don't you?
And we have all these policies, even coming for the last 5 years, and some are suggesting that some of those policies have never been implemented. And that's why we're asking that question.
Yep. That's our poll, actually.
Yeah, we'd like to find out from you what your thoughts on it are. And our poll is 202 votes have come in already. And 80% said no, they don't think the ANC policy conference outcomes will be implemented.
Yeah, interesting. Tough school. Tough school. What are you guys tweeting us on with regards to it? A policy is only as good as its implementation plan. Depansu says they've been formulating policies for the past 23 years. Why are they behaving like they just got into power, says Depansu.
This one from King Tonga says, hell no, the ANC is breathing its last breath, I would probably say. And I know Dennis Bloom will say probably the last kick of a dying horse.
Mabatu Matladi says, yes, they will.
They will implement these policies. Implementation, of course. We're also running a sports question today, and big day for Proteas women's cricket, Kendall.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've got the Proteas women who will be playing England, favourites and host England today from 11 o'clock. And we're asking the question at home, what do you think? Will the Proteas women's cricket team beat favourites England today?
This one coming in from Alex Matapo says, they will beat them. Hashtag, I believe.
Maybe, says Onuke. I wish them good luck with victory.
This one from Siafana says the Proteas are looking in a good condition, so definitely sure they're gonna beat England today. Beat them like a stepchild, I would say.
Yeah, there's a lot of work for us to get through. We'll be live at the conference shortly. Well, there's several interesting press briefings ahead. Also, we've got Professor Dirk Kotzer with us in studio. And a little bit later, we'll also look at other interesting takes on the policy conference. Don't miss it, but let's get into the top stories first.
The African National Congress Policy Conference comes to a close as the President is expected to deliver the official closing speech. The Black First Land First says it will oppose the application for a court interdict against them by the National Editors Forum, SANEF. And terror-accused twins Brandon Lee and Tony Lee Tulsi are expected back in the Johannesburg Magistrates Court. Those are all your news headlines, but before we get to the news, let's find out from Kendall Makamate what's happening on the sports front, Kendall.
Well, quite a lot happening. Good morning, gentlemen. It's a crackerjack of a day we're expecting in the sports world. Good morning to you at home. This is what we've got planned for you in the sports today. First up, Bafana Bafana give their fans something to cheer about, beating Botswana 2-0 to advance to the losers final of the COSAFA Cup. And then, of course, the big story of the day is how Team Dimension Data's Mark Cavendish crashed out of the Tour de France as Peter Sagan got disqualified for elbowing him out of the way. And last but not least, the Proteas women will continue their march on the world title when they play host England in the ICC Women's World Cup today. And of course, we are asking you that question. What do you think? How do you think they'll go in that match, playing one of the top four? All this and more later on at 10:40. For now, it's back to Elvis, who's got the news.
Thank you, Kendall. Top story this hour. The President, Jacob Zuma, is expected to give the final closing speech at the ANC National Policy Conference. Meanwhile, the ANC has called on the Swaziland government to release all political prisoners and unban all political parties. Briefing the media on its international relations document, the party says it still maintains its position that South Africa must pull out of the International Criminal Court. This comes as the ICC is expected to announce its decision on South Africa's failure to arrest the Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir.
One of the proposals on the organizational renewal is to have the two deputy presidents. One will be responsible for international relations, an indication that the ANC wants to strengthen the international relations. Turning to the region, a call has been made for the ANC to intervene in the Swaziland question.
The Commission reflected on the nature of the Swazi monarchy, where the king wields executive, judicial and legislative power. It further discussed that the people of Swaziland still suffer gross human rights violations, as well as reflected on the status of political activity of Budemo, Swayoko and SSN that are now prescribed as under the Anti-Terrorism Act. Accordingly, the Commission recommended that the 53rd resolution of the Mangaung Conference on Swaziland be implemented, and further recommended that the ANC explore mechanisms of strengthening its solidarity campaigns on Swaziland, and that we formalize the party-to-party relations with Budemo, but also support the call by the people of Swaziland for unbanning of political parties and the release of all political prisoners.
On the Middle East, the ANC will continue to support the Palestine struggle.
The Commission reaffirmed the ANC's unwavering and steadfast commitment for the struggle of the people of Palestine. The Commission expressed its disappointment by the Israelis' lack of commitment towards peace with the Palestinian people. The Commission debated the continued illegal occupation of Palestine by Israel, which is at its 50th year, and Israel's non-compliance with the international law. The Commission called for the downgrading of the South African embassy in Israel to send a strong message about Israel's continued illegal occupation of Palestine and the continued human rights abuses against the people of Palestine.
The ANC has once again committed itself to an African agenda. Sophie Mukwena, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, the ANC Policy Conference has identified illegal immigrants and high crime rate as a national threat to the country's sovereignty. State Security Minister David Mashlobo presented the report on peace and stability.
The ANC delegates discussed the state of the country's security over the last 20 years. Mashlobo says crime affects the well-being of the country and the economy.
I've also said that we need to tighten the issues around the management of migration, which is a major issue because migration is a global phenomenon. People are moving around, it's one globe for various reasons. Others are asylum seekers, but others, they are just moving because on the basis of economic opportunities.
He defended the intelligence services following criticism that it is failing in providing early warning regarding incidents of violent crime.
How do you deploy, and how do you actually deploy effectively, and how do you actually do the arrest and be able to do successful prosecution? The example you have made, a number of people who have been arrested when actually these protests are happening or only this burning of properties. But what is our problem? is our ability to get successful prosecution.
The Commission on Peace and Stability also agreed on a standalone Department of Military Veterans. The Department of Military Veterans will be separated from Defense before 2019. Muntlengeni Dipoko, SABC News, Nasrec, Johannesburg.
The ANC has proposed a relationship of cooperation and contestation with what it calls monopoly capital. The Commission on Strategy and Tactics has also decided not to recognize the concept of white monopoly capital and to refer instead to only monopoly capital. National Executive Committee member Joan Tsetsenze explained the envisioned relationship with big business.
There are areas where we would seek to cooperate with them. Higher rates of investment, job creation, skilling of people, matters to do with broad-based black economic empowerment and so on. But there is also the challenge of monopoly companies conducting themselves in such a way that they undermine societal interests. Collusion, high prices in the product markets, high returns that would not reflect the correct or appropriate distribution of income between the managers and the workers and so on and so forth. So the relationship is one of cooperation and contestation.
The Black First Land First organization says it will oppose the application for a court interdict against them by the National Editors Forum, SANEF. SANEF has asked the High Court in Johannesburg to interdict the BLF from harassing journalists, editors and commentators who have been reporting on state capture.
Last week, BLF staged a protest at the home of editor Peter Bruce. Another editor, Tim Cohen, and political analyst Karima Brown have also been intimidated. Ngitama says BLF will continue to target what he calls racist white journalists.
We certainly are going to oppose this application. It is a wrong-headed application and it is calculated to take away our democratic right to protest. There is no law in South Africa or in the Constitution that says racists have a right to be racist. This is really about racism and covering up of white monopoly capital corruption and protecting black people as the only people who are corrupt in this country.
SANEF chairperson says journalists are being harassed to keep allegations of corruption and state capture out of the public domain.
We have noted that since the warning letter we had sent Mr. Nkitama and the BLF, they have instead escalated and increased the number of journalists that they are actually threatening. We were also quite alarmed that they were also disregarding the Minister of Police's warning that police will actually investigate the matter. Instead, we've seen them continuing on this orchestrated campaign to try and silence reporters.
Police Minister Fikile Mbalula has warned that those who march to journalists' homes to intimidate them will be arrested.
We will never agree when people attack journalists in their homes. We are very soon going to arrest them. The day we allow people to march to houses of our children whilst they work in their own workplaces, that will be wrong. That is why when people were marching to the Guptas, we hit you with stand grenades because we don't want you to do that. When people march to Solima Paila, we must hit them hard. And when they march to Peter Bruce, we must hit them hard. When you come to my house, I finish you.
Well, terror-accused twins Brandon Lee and Tony Lee Tulsi are expected back in the Johannesburg Magistrates Court this morning. The brothers are charged with planning to set off explosives in South Africa. They face 3 counts of contravening the Protection of Constitutional Democracy Against Terrorism and Related Activities Act. The suspects were allegedly linked to ISIS and are accused of planning strikes against the U.S. Embassy and institutions associated with Judaism in South Africa. Let's now get up to speed what's happening at the African National Congress's policy conference. We now cross to Eldrin Sampia, our reporter who's there at Nasrec. Eldrin, a very good morning to you and welcome.
Well, good morning, Elvin. Yes, it's this policy conference, and delegates are making their way into the plenary session. They will be discussing the documents, which include the issues around social transformation, as well as economic transformation, governance and legislature and governance. And I think there's one other document that's still outstanding that still needs to be discussed by plenary before it's presented in front of the media. However, for the social transformation document, we understand any moment from now, around about 9 o'clock, there will be a press briefing. Not too sure whether it will be the chairperson of the subcommittee on social transformation, Lindiwe Sisulu, who would be addressing that press briefing. But she is the subcommittee chairperson. And expectations are quite high with regards to some of the issues that are raised in this document, in the social transformation document. Of course, one of the issues that are really ranking high is the issue around racism and how the country deals with racism. You'd remember that there is a proposal that was drafted by the Culture Ministry to deal with racism and also to criminalize racism. We'll want to see how the delegates have reacted to that document, or rather to that proposal of having racism criminalized. And how do you deal with racism literally, considering that racism, as some would say, is something that some would inherit. It's something that is inherited. And how do you get away with the mental state of people who remain racist? Well, you could govern the actions of racists, but you can't govern the way they think about their fellow black South Africans. So those are some of the issues that we'll be looking into, as well as the issue of housing. Remember that as part of the country's social social net, there is housing that's being given, or free housing that's been given by government. One of the major issues that have been raised by the previous administration as well, under the administration of human settlements under Tokyo Sexwale, was that housing can't be made free forever. At some point, government needs to stop giving out houses for free. So we have to wait and see again how delegates have responded to some of those arguments. Another thing is, during the press briefings on social transformation, the subcommittee chairperson, Lindiwe Sisulu, said, just towards the end of that press briefing, she said that she just received a note where the question was, if condoms are given free, why can't sanitary towels be given free to young girls as well, to ensure that they remain in school?
Eldrin, anything else that we can expect today?
Well, certainly, as I've indicated, that the various commissions will be giving their feedback, as well as on the issue of economic transformation. There is this issue, or the contestation around white monopoly capital. We heard yesterday Joel Netshitenza saying that the ANC is settling on monopoly capital for now, at least it seems. But he also did indicate that if you look at discussions documents from the 1960 by the South African Communist Party, it does identify white monopoly capital, and he says that that's a discussion that's ongoing. Of course, as we've been indicating throughout the morning, that the decisions and the resolutions taken here at this policy conference does not mean that they become ANC policy as it stands. However, though, they would need to be ratified at the ANC's elective conference. Some might be bolstered, and some of those discussions and some of those proposals include that the ANC's top 6 be expanded, from some making proposals from 9 up until 11. But it seems that the one that is enjoying that's enjoying most support is a proposal that the expansion of the ANC's top 6 include a deputy president, a second deputy president, as well as a second deputy secretary general. So you'll have 2 deputy secretary generals and 2 deputy presidents of the ANC. We are expecting, though, the ANC Youth League to give a press briefing, and this is something which is quite intriguing, because they are probably the first leagues of the ANC to give a press briefing while the policy conference is still taking place. A number of issues that they've raised, and expectations are that they will be contesting Joel Netshitenza's report back yesterday on the issue around white monopoly capital. So we'll have to wait and see how exactly that plans out. Some are arguing that this is a sign of divisions within the party, and that the league is going about their own way, considering, of course, that the policy conference is not over and President Jacob Zuma hasn't given his overview of some of the resolutions that have been taken.
Well, speaking about the president, he'll be wrapping up the conference today. He started the conference by saying that there must be unity within the organization. Expectations from his closing remarks?
Well, certainly, as the President will be delivering the closing remarks, remember that when he made the opening remarks of this conference, speaking of the CAF, he hit back at the ANC stalwarts, the 101 stalwarts to be precise, or the veterans, the 101 veterans, those who've been calling for a policy conference, rather for a consultative conference to be taking place. Remember that consultative conference has not taken place, and the 101 stalwarts of the ANC have decided that they will have their own consultative conference, the President calling them the so-called stalwarts of the ANC, those who claim that they know the processes of the party and saying that they behaved in a quote-unquote very funny manner. Now, the developments with regards to that issue is that many have been saying that the President, while calling on unity, has in actual fact been sowing divisions, if you consider what is currently happening and the unity that the ANC, the disunity that the ANC is currently facing. Let me just quickly see. We understand that the President will be at the media lounge in about 20 minutes. Is the President there already? Not too sure if the President is there at the moment, but we are expecting the President to be there in the next 20 minutes and so forth. Remember that the President has previously done a walkabout where he spoke about the discussions that were taking place in the plenary and the unity of the party. But one of the issues that he did raise was the issue around implementing policies of the ANC. And one of those policies of the ANC that one can think of at the moment, as far back as the 2007 Polokwane conference, a decision was taken to reduce the number of provinces that the country currently has. However, though, that resolution has still not been implemented. So we'll have to wait and see whether this policy conference will force to have that resolution being abided to, and that will force, when we get to the elective conference of the ANC, we'll see a resolution being taken that this decision should be implemented as soon as possible. I was speaking earlier on about the ANC's 101 stalwarts, and many saying that the President was actually sowing divisions when he hit out at the stalwarts of the party, and there has been a pushback. We have Derek Hanekom. Derek Hanekom was raising some issues around the debates in the Economic Transformation Subcommittee around the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution. Remember that this has been a hotly debated issue, whether Section 25 of the Constitution should be amended to allow for expropriation of land without compensation. Some are making the argument that the Constitution already allows for that, while some are arguing, including the President, that the Constitution doesn't. And remember that the President has made a call where he called on opposition parties, where he called rather on parties in Parliament, those who serve the interests of the black majority, as he called it, to come together and amend Section 25 of the Constitution. So we'll have to wait and see how that plans out. I see that many reporters are making their way in to the media lounge, where we expect President Jacob Zuma to be doing a walkabout, and we'll certainly try to bring you that live.
Aldrin Sampia, thank you so much for that update. That was a reporter live at Nasrec today. So we'll keep you posted on all the happenings at Nasrec there. That's why we're asking you this question, a very important question. If you've been following the policy conference of the African National Congress, we're asking you, are you surprised that the ANC rejected the notion of white monopoly capital? That's the question we pose to you. Let's take a look at what you are telling us in the meantime. This one coming in from Atini says, the ANC is black monopoly capital. It is divided. The ANC is embarrassing itself. This one coming from Oketsi says, I'm not surprised that the ANC rejected white monopoly capital because that's a fancy word to other comrades. This one coming from Dr. Prince Shaka says, not surprised at all. WMC is a weapon of the losing and the weak camp in the ANC factional battle. Rejection is triumph of good over evil. Those are some of your comments. You can keep them coming. We'll read them as we continue, and we're going to continue that discussion shortly with Eben and, of course, Professor Kotsia here in studio. Now, a picture of the day comes from Manoj Gupta. That's on your screen right there. Peter Sagan disqualified from Tour de France for causing a crash which involved Mark Cavendish. Cycling tour underway there. What do you make of that one? Let's now take a look at our comment of the day, which comes from Makuka Chanda. He says, my thoughts and prayers go to the business people who lost their properties and businesses in the Lusaka City market fire. It's very sad and saddening, says Mukaka there. Let's now take a look at what's happening in our courts today. And we're starting off here in Gauteng. 2 men accused of robbery at the office of the Chief Justice are due back in the Mamelodi Magistrates Court today. And then still staying in Gauteng, terror-accused twins Brandon Lee and Tony Lee Tulsi are expected back in the Johannesburg Magistrates Court today. And then moving to the northwest, the Mabato Regional Court in Maikeng in the northwest is expected to pass sentence today in the murder case of a 12-year-old Wamitladi. And finally, in the Northern Cape, the municipal manager and chief financial officer of the Khasahonyama municipality will appear at the Kuruman Magistrates Court on charges of fraud. We'll keep you updated on some of those stories across the country and what's happening in our courts. Now, tomorrow, you don't want to miss it. Tomorrow, we wrap up the ANC policy conference and job losses here in South Africa. And of course, we also want to ask you that question, of course, in our poll today. Do you think that these policies will implement it? Eben will take that discussion further just after the break.
Do you support the calls made by Bladen Nzimande and Solly Mapaila?
It is not a call by Comrade Solly Mapaila and Comrade Bladen Nzimande. It is the position of the party.
Yes.
And the position of the party, we support it unambiguously.
Why?
The theory of the revolution, in simple terms, was that revolutionary forces are going to take charge of the state. And having taken charge of the state, they are going to transform the state to eventually transform society.
Join me in Port Zedu live every Monday to Thursday at 17:30.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News. It's the final day of the ANC's 5th policy conference. It's at Nasrec, south of Johannesburg. And of course, one of the key questions, a couple of the key questions come out. The one in the last 24 hours is around white monopoly capital, and we're asking you that question. Let's put it on the screen. It's now been rejected. Yes, it's been rejected by the Commission on Strategy and Tactics during these discussions. That's the question. Send us your tweets on it. We'll put it up on screen as we'll do as we continue with our discussions. We're also running a poll with a lot of the complaints coming in from you as our viewers are saying that, well, a policy conference is only good if these policies are actually implemented. And these policies are the same policies we've seen in 2007, 2012, 2017, some say even as far back as 1994. 229 votes in, more than 80% are you saying you don't believe it will be implemented. Anyhow, we've got, well, the right person to talk about these. Political analyst from UNISA, Professor Dirk Kotze, is with us this morning. Prof, good morning.
Good morning, thank you.
Prof, I want to start with the Commission for Strategy and Tactics, because I think that's probably been the key discussion point of the last 24 hours. White monopoly capital, the white has been dropped. Just give me your overview on the document itself and then the outcomes.
Well, this is one of the oldest documents in the ANC. The most prominent one is in the one of 1969, the Moribori Strategy and Tactics document. Since 1990, the ANC almost at every of its national conferences had such a document. It's supposed to be an overarching document. It's something which presents to the ANC members, first of all, but the public in general, the ANC's philosophy about how they see themselves, how they see the future of South Africa in the context of what they refer to as the National Democratic Revolution, what they call the balance of powers. That means within South Africa, where are the strong and the weak points, how do they fit into that? They refer to themselves as the strategic center of power within that context, and then even the international context. So they want to look at where does South Africa fit into, and by implication the ANC, into the global scene. And then this notion of the white monopoly capital is in a sense part of this internal balance of forces that they've identified quite in the past. And I must be honest, which is maybe a bit of a contradiction of what Joel Netshitenzhe has said, in many of these previous documents, quite recently, they used the concept of white monopoly capital.
Does that then mean that this has become the sharp end of the factional battle within the ANC?
That's exactly the point. And I think this is the significance of what we've heard yesterday from his side. And incidentally, this is something which appears already in the draft document. He left out already the white part of the monopoly capital. And I think we know very well that he is on the Ramaphosa side. He was one of the persons who introduced the so-called motion of no confidence at one of the last, at the May NEC meeting. So from that point of view, I think subsumed or below the surface, in between the lines, is the contestation, the narrative contestation between, on the one hand, the Zuma and Dlamini Zuma group, which is in favor of white monopoly capital, coupled with radical economic transformation. On the other side is more the focus on state capture. And I think what we've seen is that a sort of a power struggle at the policy conference about which one of these two narratives is the dominant one. And it appears, at least from now, as if the first victory, if you can put it in inverted commas, is for him and that group.
There's been victories claimed every day for the last 5 days that we've been at Nasrec, and we've been reporting on it. If you have to look at the last 5 days, in your learned view, how do you view what the outcome of this factional battle, if we can call it that, so far, despite, of course, all the shows of unity?
Well, I think what we are seeing is that it's indecisive. It's not a clear-cut situation. It is very much, I use the concept of that we actually have at this stage two ANCs within one. The one centered around President Zuma and then the Dlamini Zuma supporters, and then the other one around the deputy president. As a result of that, there's a sense of a stalemate within the ANC. We've seen it within the NEC, the fact that they couldn't take decisions, really outright decisions. It spilled over into cabinet. We know about the ministers who have taken up different positions. And I think that has now also, to a large extent, dominated this policy conference. And that is why it is difficult to see that decisions will be taken here. And I have to qualify, these are sort of draft decisions because it must go to the national conference at the end of the year. So these are not final. And these issues, even about monopoly capital, white monopoly capital, can be overturned at the national conference. Something similar happened in 2012 with this notion of the second phase of the transition.
We see there already the ANC Youth League are preparing a press conference a little bit later, I think, to respond directly to the strategy document, strategy and tactics document. I suppose the expectation of that is quite clear.
Yes, no, that is, over the last number of months, it has become very much predictable where the different groups within the ANC position themselves. The two leagues, the Women's League and the Youth League, is very close to President Zuma and therefore will be highly critical of this decision about white monopoly capital or monopoly capital. And obviously between now and December we'll try to use their influence in order to overturn this. The same will possibly apply to some of the provinces like the Free State and Mpumalanga, Northwest Province. So I don't think we must accept that this is the end of the process in terms of this debate. But that's why I'm saying it's in a sense almost like a provisional victory for the pro-Ramaphosa group. But I don't think we must take this for granted now already.
Yeah, there's a long road ahead, and of course lots of victories will be claimed in the weeks and months to come. I want to take you to our poll quickly because any policy is only as good as its implementation, and we put it to our viewers. We ask our viewers this question. This ANC policy conference that's happening at Nasrec, will the outcomes be implemented? And we've seen this to be a key challenge, not just now, but for the last 23 years, the implementation process of these wonderful policies. Our viewers are not very are not very hopeful of this. How do you feel?
First of all, I must say, this, as I said just now, this policy resolutions first must be adopted in December. So we must take that for granted. So it cannot be implemented immediately.
Yeah.
But let's say we look at the period post-December. I think one of the main problems for the ANC is that they have policies on about everything. I've written something recently which argues that the ANC's, I think the problem of the ANC is that they concentrate very much on policy objectives, but they don't have a strategy for implementation. Don't have a type of a policy roadmap of how to implement it. And that's the weak point. I think a good example of that is the National Development Plan. It has received a lot of attention by Minister Jeff Radebe now.
Yeah.
And the problem, it's becoming outdated. It's about 6 years old already. And some of the targets there are completely unrealistic for the current situation. But no adaptation, no amendment is made to that. And I think those are some of the problems, is that the policies and the current situation as they evolve are not necessarily in sync all the time. And that, plus then, the fact that all these policies now assume the existence of a so-called developmental state. And one of the key elements of a developmental state is a very strong public sector, civil servants. And unfortunately, we don't have that capacity at this point.
Prof, there are many points that we have to address still. I'm going to ask you to hang around with us because we want to talk about quite a few things. But, of course, the one that's caught the eye has been the Commission on Strategy and Tactics. Now, they've decided not to recognize the term or the notion white monopoly capital. National Executive Committee member Joel Netshitenze explained the envisioned relationship that should be had with big business.
Just briefly indicate the character of a policy conference. A policy conference doesn't take decisions as such. It processes the documents that have been circulated to the branches, and the outcome goes back to the branches and other structures for discussion for finalization at the national conference. And therefore, a narrative in reflecting the outcome of the policy conference that seeks to portray victors and vanquished would not be accurate because discussions continue. I will also assume that you are familiar with the long document of about 50 pages on strategy and tactics of the ANC, which seeks to outline the kind of society that we seek to create, and secondly, what methods, what programs we need to adopt in order to achieve that objective. All the 11 commissions, for the first day of discussion in the commissions, discussed the strategy and tactics document, and the sense that all the rapporteurs and chairs had is that the discussions were incisive, they focused on the substantive issues, and everyone was quite impressed with the quality and the focus of the delegates on those strategic issues. The next matter would be the major conceptual issues that were under discussion. You will be aware that the title of this document is Enhancing Organizational Integrity in order to intensify action towards a national democratic society. This is the first time that the ANC in its strategy and tactics document refers to the issue of organizational integrity, because the assessment is that so fraught has the environment within the organization become that if the ANC does not experience a turnaround, it will not be able to construct that national democratic society that it aspires to. The issue was raised, is it to restore or to enhance organizational integrity? And ultimately, the conclusion that was reached was that we are not looking back to some glorious past, but what we need to do under changed and changing circumstances is to ensure that the ANC develops, enhances its organizational integrity in order to be able to play its historic role. With regard to the strategic goals of the ANC, there was the issue that was raised about how, in simple terms, can we characterize this national democratic society? And the agreement, as reflected in the draft, is that the closest that society can be equated to across the globe would be a combination of a developmental state that leads in ensuring very high rates of growth, but secondly, combined with social democracy, a state that ensures redistribution of resources in favor of the poor. So it is a combination of what you would find, for instance, in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, South Korea, Singapore, and so on. Social democracy, you can look at some European states, especially the Nordic countries. But there was the emphasis that historically some of the developmental states were not democratic. If you look at South Korea, for instance, at the beginning, and that therefore it is important that we emphasize in the South African setting that this developmental state should be a democratic developmental state. There was then an intense discussion on the issue of monopoly capital. And the outcome of that discussion is as follows. Firstly, it reiterates what is contained in the 2007 Strategy and Tactics document. And this is that the relationship between the ANC and monopoly capital in particular, but also capital in general, is one of unity and struggle, or if you like, cooperation and contestation. There are areas where we would seek to cooperate with them. Higher rates of investment, job creation, skilling of people, matters to do with broad-based black economic empowerment and so on. But there is also the challenge of monopoly companies conducting themselves in such a way that they undermine societal interests.
Yeah, price fixing and collusion. That is one of the main concerns coming out of that. Of course, we've done that at length here on the Newsroom show, and we'll continue to look at what the work that the Competition Commission and the Competition Tribunal, mind you, is doing, and we'll do that as we move forward this year. But I've got Professor Dirk Kotze with me. He's going to hang around. We'll talk about the olive branch that's been handed out to business, and policy certainty and how it plays out from here in our economy towards the end of the year. But before we get there, let's just have a look at what's happening elsewhere in the world. These are some of the front pages that you can have a look at. The Times reports that scores of new bypasses are to be built under a £1 billion a year plan to combat congestion in towns and cities. That's in the UK. Then in New York, the Wall Street Journal says that North Korea's launch of its first ballistic missile that it claimed could reach the continental US raised the stakes for Washington, and the US and South Korean militaries countered by firing tactical surface-to-surface missiles into the waters off the Korean peninsula. Yes, matters are escalating at a rate of knots there. Finally, in Israel, the Jerusalem Post reports that a special report from India looks at what's held India and Israel's relationship back until now and how it could shape dealings with the United States going forward. Back home, here is what you can see on our Facebook page. Now today we see an unflinching State Security Minister, David Matlova, drew laughter from reporters when he announced that his department knew about violent protests in Bawani, Limpopo, a year before they happened. Then we also see the Mpumalanga government says it will meet with the families of the victims of Tuesday's deadly collision, in which 18 people died when two minibus taxis and a truck collided on the R541 between Badplaas and Mikado Dorp. Finally, informal waste collectors here in Johannesburg will stage a protest against official waste disposal agency Pick It Up. They're accusing the company of not consulting with them while appointing service providers to carry out the separation at source of recyclable waste in the areas of Northcliffe, Roodepoort and Randburg. Interesting indeed. All of that on our Facebook page. We're going to take a short little break. When we come back, we'll talk ANC policy conference and we'll take it a little bit further. Don't miss it.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News Live at 1000 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that Swallows are out of the ABC Multiple League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
Welcome back. You're back with us here on the Newsroom show. Of course, we've got Professor Dirk Kotze from UNISA with us, well, to talk about the latest pronouncements at the ANC's 5th policy conference. It will be, closed by President Jacob Zuma a little bit later today. We're expecting him to do a little walkabout the media center shortly, and we'll be live there. But, Professor Kotze, the dropping of the white in front of monopoly capital, it's the olive branch to business, I suppose, that the markets would enjoy.
Yes, I suspect that is one of the main motives. That it is, well, maybe two. The one is for the business, the other one is for the white community in general, because I think there's a sense that President Zuma has become more nationalist in his approach, and this is sort of the counter move for that. But coming back to the business, I think the business community has become quite nervous in anticipation of this policy conference. And still, it is very difficult to really anticipate what are the policy proposals with respect to business or macroeconomics in general that will come out of this conference. But I think that the fact that we've seen the mining charter recently, the business community responding very negatively to that. We've seen the public protector's report on the banks and the Reserve Bank. That also created very negative sentiments. So I think from an ANC point of view, and someone like John Echechenje and the other more senior persons in the ANC are very much aware of that there must be a type of a balance.
Yeah.
That the ANC calls itself this broad church, which theoretically speaking at least should include more of the business community also. And what we are now knowing is that the black middle class and the black business class is expanding quite rapidly.
Yeah.
So it starts to include them also or affect them also. So it's not anymore just we versus the business community. But what was interesting is the way in which he presents the relationship between the ANC and the business as both cooperative but also contesting in some cases. And I think that is possibly the best summary of the relationship between the ANC and the business community for quite some time.
Now, you touched on the mining charter, and this, of course, being a policy conference, much of the ANC's policies of the last 50 years have been influenced by the Freedom Charter, and the Freedom Charter has not had one mention, as far as I can recall, during the last week at this conference. Are you surprised by this, or is there another agenda?
Well, I think the agenda with respect to the Freedom Charter, and maybe we can just quickly remind ourselves, it became a big issue in 2008 with the formation of COPE. It became again a big issue with the formation of the EFF. So it is seen as something coming from the left almost within the ANC. But I think what we've seen with this conference is the emergence of the NDP as the modern Freedom Charter, as the overtaking the historical Freedom Charter. And it assumes now more or less the same function within the ANC as the Freedom Charter of the past. But if we look at the opposition, especially the EFF, the Freedom Charter is still very much alive. It's very often referred to. And I think it is, in a sense, strange that the ANC does not really cover their backs by referring to both the Freedom Charter and the NDP, in order to, because that is really justifying what they are doing in terms of their policies.
Talking about policies, we've seen pronouncements on land, death penalty, and the like. Some have called it populist moves and so forth. Populism, has it had a place at this conference thus far?
Yes, but not as much as I actually expected. I expected that, for example, in the Commission on Economic Transformation, it will become a major contestation between the main big blocs within the ANC, and very much informed by a sort of a populist approach from both sides, actually. We don't know so much what is happening inside, but what we do know is that it hasn't assumed that populist level of rhetorical operations. So in that sense, one is a bit, I'm at least very sad, I expected more in terms of that.
To wrap it up, Prof, in conclusion, the President is going to take to the podium. He's going to close this policy conference. What do you expect the President to say, and what should the President be saying?
Well, it is now quite a lot in the news that there is a so-called plan in the making about power sharing amongst the top leadership for the coming elective conference. I think he's going to talk about unity within the ANC. He did that in the past, and that is possibly one of his main considerations, and I don't know if he's going to refer to that. At the same time, I think what should have come out of this is much more focus on policy itself. And what we've seen with this conference is actually that the national conference and the succession debate overtook the focus of the policy issue. So in that sense, it wasn't a real policy conference as those of the past. And I don't know, what actually is going to be presented ultimately to the national conference. Because, just maybe the last point is that policy conferences are actually still controlled by the outgoing ANC president, and not by the new incoming president. So from next year onwards, the challenge will be how to formulate policy in the absence of a policy that were not formulated by this conference. And I think this is going to be interesting, but at the same time it creates a slight sense of uncertainty about what will be policies in the future, the next 5 years and so on.
Prof, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks.
It's been great to have you with us. Professor Dirk Kotze, of course, is with the UNISA, political analyst and, well, one of the most respected political voices in South Africa. Thank you once again for being with us. Of course, we move on as we always do, and Kendall Mahamate is here. Kendall has just joined us. If I can just have a look at what, well, we're talking about women's cricket. Yes, the women's cricketers in South Africa are playing against England today, and, well, they will be doing a great job if they can put one over the English.
No, absolutely. In fact, besides the women's cricket, we're also going to touch a little bit on the Sagan versus Cavendish saga. But starting with the women's cricket, it's something really important that the Proteas women live up to expectations after thumping the West Indies. It's going to be a tighter contest, of course.
Yeah, I mean, the English are the favourites for the title. Let's be honest, they're playing in English conditions. They've got some of the big-name players in the world. The South Africans are going to be going in as underdogs, but that's probably a good thing because they're playing quite well.
Absolutely, yeah. We're looking forward to this one, and they're playing extremely well. I mean, Marizanne Cup coming in with being top ODI bowler of coming into this contest and living up to that moniker, as well as Denaf Nikiak, the captain, working like a captain. And this team is well oiled, and I think they're playing as a unit, which is something that all teams need to do if they're going to succeed at competitions like this.
Yeah, the mood in the camp looks very good, and that's the impressive thing. Denaf Nikiak looks like she's galvanized the team, she's got them together, and they're playing very well. But we wish them well. The big international sports story of the last 24 hours was, well,
Tour de France.
The Tour de France. Peter Sagan elbowing, giving the elbow to Cavendish into the boardings there, and it ended his race. Of course, Cavendish, for those of you who don't know, he rides for South Africa's Dimension Data team, and that was a massive setback for them.
No, fully, because Cavendish is a top class. He's one of the elite, the few top 10 riders in the world, and he was going to take Team Dimension Data to the next level, and that's exactly what he's done.
That elbow.
That elbow, you can't miss it. It's there. Sticks his elbow out and sends Cavendish into the barriers.
Should he have been kicked off the tour, though, Peter Sagan? Some say, yes, the French kicked him off because he's won the green jersey 5 times in a row, and they're hoping that this guy, Zuma, who is in picture here, will now go on and win the green jersey first time in Yonks for the French.
Conspiracy theory. The reality, though, is that when you're riding and you stick your elbow out to send another rider off, that is grounds for dismissal. That is grounds for disqualification. Yes, a lot of people have weighed in on it. We know that Sagan is actually appealing this disqualification. But you know what? You're a rider yourself. What would you think?
I think in the sprints it all happens. You use your elbows to balance sometimes, and I think it's maybe a little bit tough to kick him off the tour, maybe a big time penalty or even a financial penalty. But for the world of cycling, it's a big setback to have Peter Sagan, who really is one of the top 3 marquee names in the sport, to not have him there. But hey, what do I know?
Look, you know what, Eben, I think it's something to talk about for the ages, something we'd like to get your comments on. You know what our Twitter handle is. Send us your comments on that as well while you're at it.
We'll be back with you at the top of the hour with more Doma City.
Africa is getting more and more digitized, and people have to navigate through an increasingly connected world.
I did call my bay over here.
At school, I use my Wi-Fi.
On Network, we tell you about Africa's technology and social media landscape.
Politicians already do use Twitter a lot.
It's both Android and iOS compatible.
A solar-charged box that includes everything, the computer, the projector.
That's Network with Ms. Phumelele Zondi every Sunday at 9 p.m.
Water-wise, water is an essential need. The scarcity of it could lead to loss of many lives, including livestock, plants, and much more. It requires us to use it sparingly and responsibly in times of need, failing which our taps and sanitation will not function. For more on water and weather issues, stay tuned to News Today, every Friday at 4:45 Central African Time. SABC News, making you water-wise.
back live with us. It's 10 o'clock Central African time. A very good morning to you. It's a wonderful day in Johannesburg, if you're an ANC member.
If you're an ANC member, it's been a fantastic few days of deliberation and great interview you had with the professor just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, some really interesting points and some real insight, because I think the professor worked with some of the ANC members on some of the strategy and tactics documents and so forth. So he had a unique insight into what the discussions, what came out of these discussions. So I was quite chuffed to hear some of the inside information that he shared with us. Of course, the focus today, Kendall, is on white monopoly capital. That is no more, it is now monopoly capital. And that's the question we ask our viewers.
Absolutely. We want to find out from our viewers, from you at home, what do you think about this? The ANC has rejected the notion of a white monopoly capital. What are your thoughts on that? Are you surprised?
Well, the ANC Youth League will have a conference and they will reject the fact that it's been rejected a little bit later. We'll take that live. But Molabatsi Masedi says to us, Newsroom, white monopoly capital reflects the specificity of the South African manifestation of monopoly capital. The ANC must retain it, says Molabatsi.
Barry Martin says, I'm very surprised that the ANC rejected the idea. It seems to me that something fishy is going on.
The professor called it the sharp end of factional politics. Hloni Nyetanyane says the ANC has outdone itself this time around. Ministers and premiers spent 6 days arguing whether monopoly capital is white or purple. But is this a very important point? Is it the olive branch it's been handed out to business in order to, allay the fears of the market? All these things have to be considered, and you heard that those were some of the points raised by Professor Kotsen, and we'll replay some of that interview a little bit later. But of course, Kendall, we're also conducting a poll today.
Yeah, and the poll is stemming from the same, and we want to find out from you, will the NC Policy Conference outcomes be implemented? What are your thoughts? Will those policy outcomes be implemented? Interesting. We've got a whole host of views. We've got 244 votes that have come in, and even the numbers speak for themselves.
Yeah, they say no. Well, the professor shed some light on this as well, and he said to me, well, they can't be implemented directly now. They have to be ratified in December, and then they have to be taken forward in the policy discussions and documents that happen. So it's not straight away, but I said to him in turn, but they've been discussed since 1994 at every policy conference. We've had 5 now, and it continues to be the same thing. What does Francisco tell us?
He says no, there won't be implementation. Good policies, not enough. Implementation is what we need.
Yeah, that's what all the scholars are telling us, Francisco. Barry Martin says to us, ANC Poly, no, the ANC Policy Conference outcomes will not be implemented, and it will remain a secret in the ANC organization.
Lincoln Bernardo says, while politicians serve the party and not the people, the policies don't matter. We need radical electoral change if any policy is to matter.
Interesting take that from Lincoln. Yes, that's the policy conference that will be closed by the president in his closing remarks a little bit later. That will be live on this channel, probably sometime in the early evening, one would think. Of course, in a short while, we expect it any minute now. President Jacob Zuma is going to do his final walkabout in the media center. He'll be talking to journalists. I'm hoping that Aldrin St-Pierre will be able to grab the president aside and ask him 1 or 2 other pertinent questions. But for the Proteas, it's a red letter day today, isn't it?
It is. They're playing the host and favorite. They're playing England. In fact, that match is meant to start at 11:30. I haven't done a rain check just to make sure what it's looking like. But you know what? It's going to be a humding of a match. The net run rate is very close.
Yes.
The Proteas are ahead of the English Roses. But you know what? It's going to be a very interesting match, that one.
They call them the Queen Proteas on social media. Let's have a look at your tweets.
Barry Martin weighs in on this one as well. Says, yes, I'm confident that the girls will beat England today.
Mystic Man, Mr. Malachi says to us, I assume it doesn't matter who they're facing today. The only good thing happening in South Africa after a massive petrol drop. There are many good things happening in South Africa, my friend.
Lechasa Butler Mola Lechasa, well, welcome and good morning to you. He says, yes, the Proteas will win. Positivity.
Thank you very much, Lechasa, for putting that great positive spin on it. Yeah, in South Africa we can sometimes we can sometimes be our own worst enemy.
Get down in the dumps over very small matters.
It's either we're right on top of the world or down in the dumps. We need to find some equilibrium.
Yeah, we do.
I would think. Anyhow, we'll keep it going for the next hour. Myself and Kendall, let's take a look at our top stories now. The ANC's fifth policy conference will come to a close today as the president is expected to deliver the official closing speech later. The South African National Editors Forum appeals to all journalists to wear black armbands in solidarity with their colleagues who are being harassed by Black First, Land First. And terror-accused twins Brandon Lee and Tony Lee Tulsi are expected back in the Johannesburg Magistrates Court today. That's the news. Let's find out from Kendall what's in the world of sport.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Good morning to you. This is what we've got planned for you for 10:40 when we do the sport.
Great ball. Clearly. Good pass. Mokate. Chance for Nuruddin. Goal!
Bafana Bafana give their fans something to cheer about, beating Botswana 2-0 to advance to the losers final of the 2017 COSAFA Cup.
Into the barriers.
Team Dimension darters Mark Cavendish crashes out of the Tour de France as Peter Sagan gets disqualified for elbowing him out of the way.
That was a brutal sprint.
The Proteas women continue with their march on the world title when they play host England in the ICC Women's World Cup today. Of course, we'll bring you all of this in more detail at 10:40. For now, do stay with Evan as he's got the news.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kendall. Tough story right now. Now, President Jacob Zuma is expected to give the final closing speech at the ANC's National Policy Conference a little bit later today. This as the ANC called on the Swaziland government to release all political prisoners and unban all political parties. Briefing the media on its international relations document, the party says it still maintains its position that South Africa must pull out of the International Criminal Court. This comes as the ICC is expected to announce its decision on South Africa's failure to arrest Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir tomorrow.
One of the proposals on the organizational renewal is to have the two deputy presidents. One will be responsible for international relations, an indication that the ANC wants to strengthen the international relations. Turning to the region, a call has been made for the ANC to intervene in the Swaziland question.
The Commission reflected on the nature of the Swazi monarchy, where the king wields executive, judicial and legislative power. It further discussed that the people of Swaziland still suffer gross human rights violations, as well as reflected on the status of political activity of Pudemo, Swayoko and SSN that are now prescribed as under the Anti-Terrorism Act. Accordingly, the Commission recommended that the 53rd resolution of the Mangaung Conference on Swaziland be implemented, and further recommended that the ANC explore mechanisms of strengthening its solidarity campaigns on Swaziland, and that we formalize the party-to-party relations with Pudemo, but also support the call by the people of Swaziland for unbanning of political parties and the release of all political prisoners.
On the Middle East, the ANC will continue to support the Palestine struggle.
The Commission reaffirmed the ANC's unwavering and steadfast commitment for the struggle of the people of Palestine. The Commission expressed its disappointment by the Israelis' lack of commitment towards peace with the Palestinian people. The Commission debated the continued illegal occupation of Palestine by Israel, which is at its 50th year, and Israel's non-compliance with the international law. The Commission called for the downgrading of the South African embassy in Israel to send a strong message about Israel's continued illegal occupation of Palestine and the continued human rights abuses against the people of Palestine.
The ANC has once again committed itself to an African agenda. Sophie Mukwena, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, the policy conference also identified illegal immigrants and a high crime rate as of a national threat to South Africa's sovereignty. State Security Minister David Mahlobo presented the report on peace and stability.
The ANC delegates discussed the state of the country's security over the last 20 years. Mahlobo says crime affects the well-being of the country and the economy.
I've also said that we need to tighten the issues around the management of migration, which is a major issue because migration is a global phenomenon. People are moving around, it's one globe for various reasons. Others are asylum seekers, but others, they are just moving because on the basis of economic opportunities.
He defended the intelligence services following criticism that it is failing in providing early warning regarding incidents of violent crime.
How do you deploy, and how do you actually deploy effective, and how do you actually do the arrest and be able to do successful prosecution? The example you have made, a number of people who have been arrested when actually these protests are happening or only this burning of properties. But what is our problem is our ability to get successful prosecution.
The Commission on Peace and Stability also agreed on a standalone Department of Military Veterans. The Department of Military Veterans will be separated from Defense before 2019. Muntlengeni Dipoko, SABC News, Nasrec, Johannesburg.
The South African National Editors Forum is appealing to all journalists to wear black armbands today and stand in solidarity with their colleagues who are being harassed by the Black First Land First organisation. Following various incidents in recent days, SANEF has filed an urgent court application against BLF and its founder, Andile Mnitama. It aims to stop the further harassment of journalists, editors and commentators who've been reporting on state capture. Meanwhile, the Black First Land First organisation says it will oppose the application for a court interdict against them by the National Editors Forum, SANEF. SANEF has asked the High Court in Johannesburg to interdict the BLF from harassing journalists who have been reporting on state capture.
Last week, BLF staged a protest at the home of editor Peter Bruce. Another editor, Tim Cohen, and political analyst Karima Brown have also been intimidated. Mnitama says BLF will continue to target what he calls racist white journalists.
We certainly are going to oppose this application. It is a wrong-headed application and it is calculated to take away our democratic right to protest. There is no law in South Africa or in the Constitution that says racists have a right to be racist. This is really about racism and covering up of white monopoly capital corruption and protecting black people as the only people who are corrupt in this country.
SANEF chairperson says journalists are being harassed to keep allegations of corruption and state capture out of the public domain.
We have noted that since the warning letter we had sent Mr. Mnitama and the BLF, they have instead escalated and increased the number of journalists that they are actually threatening. We were also quite alarmed that they were also disregarding the Minister of Police's warning that police will actually investigate the matter. Instead, we've seen them continuing on this orchestrated campaign to try and silence reporters.
Police Minister Fikile Mbalula has warned that those who march to journalists' homes to intimidate them will be arrested.
We will never agree when people attack journalists in their homes. We are very soon going to arrest them. The day we allow people to march to houses of our children whilst they work in their own workplaces, that will be wrong. That is why when people were marching to the Guptas, we hit you with stand grenades because we don't want you to do that. When people march to Solima Paila, we must hit them hard. And when they march to Peter Bruce, we must hit them hard. When you come to my house, I finish you.
Well, we've got a developing story, as you can see on our strap running on screen there. Breaking news, there's been a break-in at the Hawks offices in Silverton. Computers apparently stolen. We don't have much more information. We'll keep you updated as the information develops and comes in on that story. Meanwhile, terror-accused twins Brandon Lee and Tony Tulsi are expected back in the Johannesburg Magistrates Court this morning. The brothers are charged with planning to set off explosives here in South Africa. They face 3 counts of contravening the protection of constitutional democracy against. The suspects were allegedly linked to ISIS and are accused of planning strikes against the U.S. Embassy and institutions associated with Judaism here in South Africa. 2 men accused of robbery at the office of the Chief Justice are due back in the Mamelodi Magistrates Court today, given Msimangu and his cousin, Big Boy Yose, are out on bail. The third accused, Msimangu's older brother, Nkosinati, is also currently out on bail. The computers contained important and sensitive information about judges in South Africa and officials in the office of the Chief Justice, the Constitutional Court, High Court, Supreme Court of Appeal and other specialist courts. Now, waste pickers here in Johannesburg who collect waste informally to sell for recycling will stage a protest today against the official waste disposal agency, Pick It Up. They accuse Pick It Up of not consulting them while appointing service providers to carry out the separation at source of recyclable waste in the areas of Northcliffe, Roodepoort and Randburg. The waste pickers plan to protest at Pick It Up's offices in Braamfontein. Pick It Up's Managing Director, Lungile Dlamini, says the entity is committed to working with these waste pickers. Now, I can tell you that the President has just arrived at Nasrec, south of Johannesburg, where he's going to do a walkabout, we are told. There you see heavy security presence, as you expect, around the head of state. He's coming into the precinct where, of course, all the journalists are housed at the Nasrec Centre. We have communicated with our reporter Aldrin St. Pierre. He's going to try and, doorstep the President and try and get some of his views on the pronouncements that's been made in the last 24 hours there. You see a high security contingent surrounding the President. He's going into the media centre right now. We will go there. We'll go there live straight away. Aldrin St. Pierre is up and ready. Well, we haven't got that connection stabilized with Aldrin St. Pierre yet. As you can see, there's quite a lot of movement, official vehicles getting themselves ready for the President. Quite a few onlookers around for the President's walkabout. Of course, President Jacob Zuma will close proceedings a little bit later today. I think Aldrin's ready now. Very good morning to you once again, Aldrin. It's over to you.
As well as News 24, we expect him to pass by the SABC studio as well, and hopefully we'll be able to pop in the question and what the President's take is on what's currently happening in terms of the ANC's policy conference and what he feels the level of discussions are at in terms of the veracity, in terms of the arguments that are being made, and the quality of the debate as well. We've seen a number of proposals that have been made in the ANC's policy documents, about 9 documents, 11 commissions that have sat down to discuss these documents. And, of course, today we expect about 5 commissions to be reporting back to the plenary as well as to the media in terms of some of the resolutions that have been taken. But as we have been indicating throughout the morning, that the policy conference resolutions that have been taken will not be binding up until they go to the to the elective conference of the ANC, which is expected to be taking place in Gauteng. Unclear at the moment whether it will be this venue as well, Nasrec. The ANC normally uses the Gallagher Estate in Midrand, where these ANC functions ordinarily will take place. But it seems that there's a lot of interest, and as well as a lot of positive feedback with regards to this venue, the Nasrec venue, just on the outskirts of Soweto. Quite a big venue indeed. Well, President Jacob Zuma, as I've indicated, doing a walkabout. Actually, about 2 days ago, he did a similar walkabout, but not with looking at the media working stations and so forth. But when he was speaking about the policy conference that's underway, he spoke about the level of debates that's currently happening, but also raised his concerns around implementation of ANC policies, that there are some policies of the ANC that are great policies. However, though, those policies have not been implemented. One of those policies is the policy and the decision of the Polokwane Conference to implement or reduce the number of provinces. We know that policy decision is also part of the discussions that are currently taking place here, and of course will also go to the elective conference. But something that the president did actually mention in his opening remarks when he was speaking at the opening of the policy conference was that he wants an establishment of a quote-unquote entity. Not sure as yet what shape that entity will be taking, but he says that entity should be monitoring all policy decisions that the ANC have taken and whether those are implemented. Actually, just speaking about some of those policy decisions, if you look at the issue around digital migration as well, you'd remember that the ANC took a decision at the NGC, the NGC policy conference that took place about 2 years ago. And there was that contestation between the communications subcommittee of the ANC as well as the Department of Communications. Now let's go to Criselda and see what Criselda can see from her side.
President Jacob Zuma any minute now, as he's done, walking through the media houses as we're stationed here at Nasrec, to come here to the SABC studios as well. We're not expecting him to say much, if it's anything to go by with the walkabout that he did at the exhibition centre a bit earlier on this week. President Jacob Zuma essentially talking about unity in the African National Congress. That's what they need to emerge from this conference with. But of course, as you pointed out, Aldrin, some of the concerns regarding the African National Congress, we'll see if we cannot get a question or two to President Jacob Zuma, but the security quite often not allowing him to take any questions at this time. But as this ANC policy conference comes to a close, we're expecting, quite a lot of robust debate, and all the debates that have taken place in this policy conference to go back to the branches. And we know discontent at this point on one of the key issues that came out of one of the press conferences yesterday relating to white monopoly capital. The ANC basically saying that the white monopoly capital in South Africa should not be classified as such, but should just be called monopoly capital, and that this notion does exist in all parts of the world, but it should not be referred to as white monopoly capital. The ANC Youth League as well, quite pertinently, as President Jacob Zuma does this walkabout, the ANC Youth League will also hold a press conference a little bit later on this morning. And our understanding is that they will refute the report given by Joel Nichathenze on white monopoly capital. What we do know of what was taking place inside one of those commissions is that the ANC Youth League did express its discontent with the ANC not wanting to classify it as direct as it is, while the ANC does say, of course, that the white monopoly in the economy is still an issue. but to classify it to that particular issue. So President Jacob Zuma still in one of those commissions at this stage. I'm not so sure if you can see how everyone is gathering just outside our window here at the moment as the president walks from one of the studios to the other. And I think at this point, in terms of the policies of the ANC, we're still waiting for quite a number of those feedback sessions. We're expecting the issue on social transformation to also, there's also going to be a media briefing on that, and economic transformation as well. We'll also feel some questions on that particular issue about the chairperson of the Integrity Committee, Derek Hanekom, coming under fire in one of those commissions because of his stance on the expropriation of land without compensation, and whether the chairperson of that committee himself will face disciplinary action over his remarks in March 2016, where he said the expropriation of land without compensation is not ANC policy. So while the ANC would certainly want to portray a united force as it comes out of this policy conference, which ends today, you can pick up that there is still some discontent amongst delegates who are attending this policy conference on an array of issues. Let's go back to Aldrin Sampier as President Jacob Zuma makes his way to the other studios, media studios that are here at Nasrec.
Well, yes, we're still waiting for President Jacob Zuma as he's making his way through the media center where people have set up, where we have the various stations that have been set up. He's now heading to the SABC news radio station booths, and then he'll probably walk into our television set where Criselda Lewis is standing by. I wonder if we'd be able to pop in a question to the president, hopefully, just with regards to, as I was indicating earlier, on the level of debate as well as the level of contestation. Yesterday, quite an important question that came from ANN7 was the role of the media and whether the ANC thinks that the media has a role to play in the concerns that they have been raised in terms of the country, the state of the country as well. And David Mahlobo, the Minister of Intelligence, as well as the member of the Subcommittee on Peace and Stability, did say that the media plays a crucial role, and some of those people who try to push regime change and so forth are the types of people who would then use the media. Understand now that he is on one of our radio stations. I wonder if we'd be able to listen in to the discussion that he's having, if at all. Well, we understand that we can't get the audio from the president, who's currently at one of our radio booths here at Nasrec. If you've just joined us, we are live at the ANC's policy conference. It's the final day of the ANC's policy conference. 6 days. It's been, it's the weather itself. It's been hot. It's been cold. And as I was saying earlier on to Professor Susan Boysens, it's probably an analogy of the current state of the debates that have been taking place. Some say that they've been hot, some say the debates have been cold, and we're waiting for President Jacob Zuma to come through and to see whether what he says, whether he believes that the type of debates and the quality of debates have been robust at all. Very, very important issues. The issue around land redistribution, the expropriation of land. We know that President Jacob Zuma is in favor of amending Section 25 of the Constitution. As I said earlier on, remember that when he was in Parliament, he called on all opposition parties, especially those who he believes serve the interest of the majority black voters, to come together and amend Section 25 of the Constitution. The likes of Jackson Mthembu, the likes of Derek Hanekom, as we've heard before in the discussions that have been taking place, they are not at all supporting that Section 25 of the Constitution be amended. They believe, Naledi Pandor actually saying that the way that the Constitution has been crafted, it is interwoven, that when you amend one section of the Constitution, it would have an impact on another section of the Constitution. And of course, we have our common law practices as well in the country. So you have to find a balance between those those two issues. Let me just quickly see if we can see the president at the moment. Okay, still in our radio station, one of our radio stations. Let's just quickly go to Griselda. Griselda?
Well, thank you very much, Eldrin. In just the next few minutes, we're hoping to throw in a question or two to President Jacob Zuma, exactly on the quality and the level of the debate that's been taking place here at the National Policy Conference. The visuals you're seeing now on our screen, here's with SABC Radio, engaging with some of our producers as well as our anchors there. And it perhaps looks like they are fielding a question or two. Unfortunately, we can't hear that. We hope perhaps would be able to do that with the president and just gauge his thinking on what the quality of these debates were over the past couple of days. But without a doubt, the sentiment that he has shared in the very brief discussions that he has had with the media certainly indicate that he is hopeful that the African National Congress will be able to emerge from this policy conference united, and that the policies that the ANC is throwing forward would be able to benefit the ordinary people of South Africa. While Aldrin mentioned, yes, there are good policies that the ANC has put in place, in particular to benefit the poor of the poor, but certainly implementation remains one of those major concerns, and the ANC certainly would want to fast-track that. Of course, all of these not ratified yet. We must indicate that. Well, I'm hearing now that President Jacob Zuma in any minute now will come into our studios here at SABC Television, where we've been broadcasting for the past few days. Let's get the president to come in just the next few minutes. Mr. President, good morning.
I always see this lady.
That's right. It's a pleasure. I'm very well, thank you, Mr. President.
I'm fine, absolutely fine.
Welcome to the SABC studios.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Mr. President, are you happy with the quality of debate over the past couple of days? It's been long, it's been drilling, it's been quite intense.
Absolutely. I think the quality of the debate indicates that we are now over 23 years in government. I listen, and what is also impressing, I've seen veterans standing up and making very serious contributions. I've seen the young people. In actual fact, when I listened to the debate, I felt that even if one goes to a pension today, this ANC will remain in good hands.
Do you think South Africans would be inspired by what has been thrown forward by the African National Congress when you talk about a number of issues that are facing the ANC and the country?
Absolutely. I think the ANC is doing what it is supposed to do as a leader of society. It is the ANC when it meets, the country must listen and the country must contribute. As you know, we also distribute publicly our documents so that the country actually participates. And I think people are seeing where we're going. They can make a contribution to the ANC.
Mr. President, one final thing, Zizi. The ANC Youth League will be holding its own press conference. We understand they're not too happy about the pronouncement that was made on white monopoly capital, saying that it does exist. And while the ANC does say that the white control of the economy is still controlled by white people, the ANC Youth League doesn't seem to be happy about that.
But that is all about, the conference is all about the debate. And the youth must always look forward. And therefore, that indicates that our youth is alive on these matters, because it is a critical matter for the country. The economy of the country, the history of the country, if the ANC doesn't talk about it, including the monopoly capital, who else? And I think the debate that the youth is putting across is that South Africa has different kind of features to ordinary or global kind of monopoly. Here you have the white minority dominating the economy. And that's a debate. It's a debate which is alive, which makes the country to look at itself.
What can we expect in your closing address, Mr. President?
Nothing. You expect me to say thank you to everybody.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, President Jacob Zuma, just having a very brief chat with us, very optimistic about the debates that have been had in this policy conference, and saying that he's quite impressed with the robust nature of these debates, and he's quite happy with how everyone has engaged on a number of issues that are facing the African National Congress as well as the country. The President is just about to exit our studios now, but open for debate, of course, is one of the issues on white monopoly capital, which the President has spoken to us about, saying it's open for debate. Of course, this does go back to the branches as well. So it's still a matter that is up for discussion at this point. And the President thanking all of us there for being part of bringing you, of course, there at home, the discussions here on the ANC's National Policy Conference. President Jacob Zuma has just left our studios. Now let's go back to our colleague Aldrin Sampier. We understand that President Jacob Zuma will go to the main center now, where the media has been converging, waiting for him.
Well, yes, Griselda, while quite a number of debates that have been taking place as we wait for President Jacob Zuma, of course, the issue around white monopoly capital, that's a debate that's still continuing. And I just quickly want to read a tweet here from Tony Engeni, who's one of the delegates here, who's speaking on white monopoly capital. He says that this deception that white monopoly capital does not exist and remains a white lie. It must be vehemently exposed, fought and defeated everywhere, especially in the branches of the ANC, which is quite important. Let me just quickly see if we can get a bit closer to the President. Mr. President, just in terms of the unity of the party, what would you say the level of debates have been like?
Quality debate that we have experienced, very high, and I'm very happy. We are going there. I'm going to G20.
Thank you.
Yes. How are you?
Very good. We hope your stay at the venue was a comfortable stay.
Very comfortable.
Thank you.
Yeah, just cold, but very comfortable. My good sister. Are you fine?
I'm fine, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that you guys are doing a very good job to inform the country and the world that the ANC is meeting. As always, when it meets, it discusses very serious issues. And I'm sure you have heard, and you are reporting. Wonderful. We are very happy indeed. I think the quality of the debate is very high, higher than other times. I'm also happy because we met for a week. This is what we need so that we can deal with the issues. And I think we're not rushing. And people were able to discuss every issue that was on the table. And as you have seen, the ANC is always vibrant. You know? Thank you very much.
Would you say the ANC would leave here united?
ANC has always been united. You guys don't understand the contradictions. They are healthy and constructive contradictions. That's what is in the ANC, not dangerous. Everyone.
Well, there you have it from President Jacob Zuma saying that the contradictions in the ANC are what he calls healthy contradictions that are taking place. Well, someone else might argue that it's a level that shows a level of divisions within the party, especially considering that yesterday you had Joel Nachitenze, who made the policy remarks after the plenary's discussion that took place, and where he said that the ANC's stance on the debate around white monopoly capital is that it is monopoly capital, which has been a stance that the ANC has always been on, and as Griselda Lewis has indicated with the President as well, is that now you have the ANC Youth League, which will be giving a press briefing, expected to speak about the issue on white monopoly capital and why they resist this. We've been speaking about the issue about land expropriation as well, the level of contestation there, and speaking about someone like Derek Hanekom, who said the Constitution is perfectly fine as it is. Section 25 doesn't need to be amended. And there was a call for Derek Hanekom to be disciplined, and the other comrades of the ANC and cadres of the ANC saying that if Derek Hanekom is forced to apologize, then President Jacob Zuma must also apologize. Or if Derek Hanekom goes through a disciplinary hearing, then President Jacob Zuma must apologize for the remarks that he made during the opening session of the party, the opening session of the policy conference of the party, when he hit out at the ANC stalwarts, the 101 stalwarts, who were calling for the two-day consultative conference. We know now that the consultative conference of the stalwarts will be taking place after this policy conference, probably in August, probably in September. The date hasn't been set as yet. But if for the mere fact that you have this formation of stalwarts who still don't believe in the leadership, the current leadership of the party, it definitely shows, points to divisions within the party. And one then wonders what mechanism the ANC's leadership can use to call on the ANC stalwarts and say, let's find a common ground with regards to this issue. The ANC stalwarts have obviously said as well that the doors remain open to have the leadership of the party also at that consultative conference. But is it really an ANC consultative conference if the ANC leadership is not part of it? Criselda, what do you make of President Jacob Zuma's remarks as well, saying that, listen, the debates that have been taking place are healthy debates. The contradictions are healthy contradictions.
Well, certainly, there, Aldrin. I think, speaking to President Jacob Zuma just a few moments ago, he seems to be entirely satisfied with the nature and the robustness of the debates that have taken place. I managed to get in that question about white monopoly capital, the discontent, which seems to be the major one here from inside the African National Congress, the youth wing. They're expressing discontent about the non-use of the word white monopoly capital. And President Jacob Zuma basically saying that the debate does continue, reiterating, of course, that none of this is cast in stone as yet. It still needs to be ratified at the elective conference in December. But in terms of the robustness, he seems to be quite satisfied with the nature that has taken place with regard to these debates. You cannot shy away, of course, from the fact that you will get some dissent within the ANC about some of the decisions that have been made. Some of the delegates themselves, senior members of the ANC, that are also coming under fire. Let's bring in Prof. Mcebisi. What are we expecting from the President's closing address? He seems to be very upbeat about the discussions that have been had.
Well, unity is very critical. So he will try to project a sense of unity, that the ANC has now reached some kind of a consensus. But at the same time, my sense is that, especially given what he said earlier, he would want to articulate things that are of interest for himself. For instance, the issues of judiciary, opposition folks going to the courts and this and that. So those are things that he might try to articulate as well, and possibly have some kind of reconciliatory note towards the veterans, because that his critique of the veterans was not received well, and for someone of his age to criticize his peers, it's not proper of a president to do that. Yeah, so he will try to reach out, and President Zuma is a master politician. He can read the mood, so he will say whatever he needs to say, not to look as if he has his back against the wall. So there will be that kind of a reconciliatory message that puts him above board, as if, he's still in control, yeah.
We'll have to see if he does extend that olive branch to the veterans. Prof. Mcebisi, just on what we might expect from the President's opening address. But we still have a very long day here at Nasrec, as some of the commissions will report back. We're still expecting a press conference on social transformation, economic transformation as well. But we certainly bring you a whole lot more here from Nasrec as we wrap up the fifth and final day of the ANC's National Policy Conference. Back to you in studio, Eben.
Yeah, thank you very much to Criselda and to Aldrin Samper. They're doing a fantastic job there at the Nasrec Exhibition Centre, where, of course, the policy conference comes to a close a little bit later today. Now we move on to something a little bit different, but something just as important. A new judgment was passed by the Johannesburg High Court that sexual abuse cases older than 20 years should now be valid. The judgment stipulates that Section 18 of the Criminal Procedure Act, which previously stated that a case of sexual abuse cannot be brought against a person if the alleged incident happened more than 20 years ago, is invalid and unconstitutional. That's according to the High Court. Now, to talk to us about this, Richard Challen, he's a researcher from the Centre for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. Very good morning to you, Richard. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
How is this going to affect the way that we police this kind of crime?
Well, it's a major victory. I mean, with extension of the case of abuse to, the law finding it invalid, that, now you can extend it beyond 20 years. And there will definitely be an increase in cases being reported of abuse to the police. And it is really a victory for major civil societies, organizations and the like. So it's a positive. Yet we still have to wait for the Concord ruling, to uphold this judgment, which we fully support.
Why has it taken so long for this judgment?
Well, it's been, as we've seen, it's been a struggle. It's, as we know, that it started from, the lawyers for human rights and various civil society organizations getting together and passing from one court and never giving up, basically, just keep pushing, and despite various rejections and setbacks, you still push forth, and finally the High Court have seen that. So.
Of course, patriarchy is always one of the things that we have to deal with here in South Africa. And the other one, I think, rape victims deal with is stigma. And within the patriarchal and the stigma context, this is significant, isn't it?
Definitely. According to a study conducted by CSVR in 2009, we've seen that numerous cases are not being reported because, as you mentioned, feelings of shame and self-blame, reluctance to report a family member or report an intimate partner because either due to threat or due to shame or due to community taboos and various, like as you mentioned, also patriarchy as it comes into play. So we've seen that's happening and really pushing back, putting the victim, really putting a stigma against the victim, causing them to, feel suppressed and not being able to report such cases.
We've seen a lot of international, high-profile international cases, of course, with some celebrities, real power brokers and so forth. That power dynamic, that's a very important aspect of this kind of context, isn't it?
Definitely so. I mean, we cannot outdo the power context because that's always that perpetuates and helps to push for such agenda as such.
What are the reasons, other reasons behind the explanations for the long delays that we see in these in the reporting or the non-reporting of sexual crimes?
Well, in addition to this, we have, we look at our legal system and we look at our police attitudes as well. Sometimes you have various discriminatory police attitudes, but also the capacity. You find that police officers and police stations do not have the capacity to deal with victims of violent abuse and gender-based abuse. So that's one of the issues that comes up. And also now with the ruling coming forth, the legal system as well, the question needs to be asked, will they be able to deal with the increase in cases that are going to be reported? And they should start working from now, the legal system, the police sector and all of that, to capacitate police officers in terms of structures, in terms of support, and also in terms of attitude, more like sensitivity towards such abuse.
Towards the victims.
Exactly.
Now, of course, we know that the reporting of sex crimes is quite low. I think the numbers like 1 in 10 get reported immediately. Do you expect this to make a difference?
Positively, we do hope it does make a difference, yes, but obviously we need to address the various issues that was mentioned before. It's all good that, the law has been made invalid and stuff, but also there need to be support for the victims as well, and breaking the stigma, breaking out, saying that support them, have community structures that support them, and more psychosocial support and more support for the victims, and eradicating that stigma attached to abuse victims.
Well, Richard, thanks for coming in today. It's very important that we do support rape survivors. Thanks for coming in. Richard Challen is a researcher from the Centre for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation here in South Africa. Time for us now to wrap up this hour by looking at the world of sport. And, of course, the Queen Proteas That's what you guys are calling them on social media. They got a big match today, mind you. They're playing against the favourites at the World Cup. That's England.
Thank you very much, Evan. Yes, absolutely. The Queen Proteas will be up against a top 4 side in England in a few minutes from now. And all this, as South African all-rounder Vernon Philander says, there's a lot of fresh new energy in the squad that will face England, the men's England team, in the first test at Lord's from tomorrow. The Proteas will be led by Dean Elgar in the absence of regular skipper Faf du Plessis, who is in South Africa for family reasons.
Lord's Cricket Ground, also known as the home of cricket. It's a happy hunting ground for South Africa, who've never lost a test at the ground since readmission. Philander, who's recently recovered from an ankle injury, is one of just 4 players who featured in the Proteas' 2012 Test Series win against England. But the class of 2017 is also geared for the challenge.
We've got a squad of 14, 15 guys over here. Whoever steps up, we've lost players in the past, guys stepped up. And like I said, it's an opportunity for someone else to step up and really make a name for themselves. So I think that's the way we always see it as a squad. And good luck to whoever's going to make his debut.
Du Plessis will be missed, but the South Africans have confidence in Elgar's leadership.
I think it's obviously an opportunity for someone else to step up and lead the country. We've got all the faith in Dean. Like I said, I said it to someone else earlier. If you have the support of the other 10 guys on the field, it'll make his job a lot easier.
Play is scheduled to get underway at 11 o'clock South African time. Liesel Zankel, SABC News.
Now, a South African 100-meter record holder, Akani Simbine, came close to beating American Justin Gatlin at the Istvan Gulay Memorial meeting in Hungary, but lost out on gold by 0.01 seconds. Simbine was edged on the line by American sprinter Justin Gatlin in the 100-meter race when he clocked 9.99 seconds, just 0.01 behind Gatlin, a former world and Olympic champion. Simbine set the national record of 9.89 at the same meet a year ago. Enrico Brenkis was in good form but could not find a place on the podium, finishing 4th in the 100-meter dash in 10.11. Simbine also bagged another silver, this time on the 200 meters, where he was edged by another American, Isaiah Young. Their times 20.21 and 20.14 respectively. And the big story coming out of the world of sports as well is how Slovakia's Peter Sagan has been disqualified from the Tour de France for causing a crash, which involved Dimension Data's Mark Cavendish. World champion Sagan elbowed Cavendish as the race ended. Arnaud Demas of Team FDH's won the 207.5 kilometer 4th stage of the Tour de France to Vittel in France. Team Sky's Geraint Thomas still sits pretty at the top of the general classification.
It was another flat stage, and Wanty Group Gobet's Guillaume von Kiersburg went on the attack straight away. The big Belgian managed to stay clear of the peloton until about 17 kilometers to the finish. This is when the real race began, with the sprinters jostling for the best positions. After a placid day of racing, the drama began inside the final kilometer. First, Thomas, in the yellow jersey, was involved in a crash, but he got back in the saddle and finished the stage. And then in the final sprint, Team Dimension Data sprinter Mark Cavendish took a heavy tumble after what looked like an elbow from Sagan.
Yellow. We'll find out in 24 hours. That was a brutal sprint.
Demas' maiden stage win also puts him in the green jersey at the top of the points classification. Although tomorrow's stage is the second shortest road stage, it is also the most difficult with a mountaintop finish. Mnikelo Madala, SABC News.
And Bafana Bafana beat Botswana 2-0 to advance to the plate final of the 2017 COSAFA Cup. Now, the host nation, which had already been knocked out in the quarterfinals of the tournament by Tanzania, will Friday meet Namibia in the losers' final. The Namibians edged Swaziland by 1-0.
Bafana Bafana were out for redemption when they took on neighbours Botswana in the plate semi-final. This after they suffered a 1-0 defeat against Tanzania in the quarter-final. Stuart Baxter's troops, however, got off to a shaky start. Bafana's goalkeeper nearly gifting Botswana a soft goal, finding himself in no man's land after a failed clearance. With the host nation still struggling to settle into the contest, Botswana continued to attack with the purpose in search of an early breakthrough. having failed to convert their early opportunities into goals. In the 18th minute, it was South Africa's turn to have a say in the final third. Orlando Pirates midfielder Riyad Nordin, who was singled out by Stuart Baxter as Bafana's best player against Tanzania on Sunday, broke the deadlock with a composed finish to put his team in the lead. Finding it difficult to break down Bafana's defense, Botswana resorted to set pieces and shooting from outside the box as they looked to restore parity. Botswana continued to commit more numbers going forward in search of the equalizer. However, they left themselves vulnerable at the back. And Julius Musamedi managed to grab his team's second goal on the night as South Africa secured a 2-0 win. Joseph Mohali, SABC News.
We will be back with more sport news in the next hour, and we'll also be bringing you what's been going on at Wimbledon, the biggest tennis showpiece on the tennis calendar. That's where we leave it for now. We'll be back shortly with more news and more analysis at the top of the hour.
There are people who have an agenda to overthrow the government of the African National Congress.
Factionalism has been institutionalized.
Our movement is in trouble.
The 2019 elections start from now.
Anything that is wanted urgently by the enemy should be dangerous.
It's not about us. Review the Constitution.
Address the issue of land restitution without compensation.
The assumption that you can just change Section 25 and everything else falls into place is mistaken.
Land of True White Monopoly Capital, it's not anywhere in the documents of the movement.
We want radical economic transformation.
We should add a position of second deputy president and 2 additional DSGs.
We need a systematic movement towards younger leadership.
We'll put faces to the voices and ask, what would Owar Tambo say? SABC News, live from the ANC Policy Conference.
Take your evening well informed with Primetime News.
Thanks for tuning in. You're watching SABC News Prime. The burning land reform issue was also a point of discussion on the first day.
If you do not have a skills revolution, you will run into the kind of problems that we're having at the moment.
We have funded about 466,000 students, out of about 800,000 students that are in the university system.
South Africa says insufficient electricity and water remains one of the biggest barriers to development and prosperity on the continent.
The top 4 batsmen in the squad, Hashim Amla, Quinton de Kock, Faf du Plessis and AB de Villiers, are certainties in the starting lineup.
I really believe we cover all bases when it comes to spin bowling, seam bowling, proper pace bowling, and an amazing batting lineup.
Stay tuned every Monday to Sunday from 6 p.m. We are certain in giving an update on all leading stories.
You see South Africa has a yellow palette which indicates a warning color on this index.
We are first to give market updates.
And the more the currency is under pressure, also our costs go up.
We always give you the best guests to keep you informed and sharpen you for the day ahead.
You got to find something people are willing to pay for, that they need now, and they have the money to pay for it. The minute you tick those 3 boxes, you're in business.
Sports Roundup to fill you in.
985 is not the end. For me, it's going faster than the 985 and keep improving the record.
Never start your day without Morning Live if you need a perfect dress guide for the day.
Parts of KZN into Kokstad, we're seeing those 4 patches. Please drive carefully.
Set the agenda for the day with Morning Live.
Water-wise, water is an essential need. The scarcity of it could lead to loss of many lives, including livestock, plants, and much more. It requires us to use it sparingly and responsibly in times of need. failing which our taps and sanitation will not function. For more on water and weather issues, stay tuned to News Today, every Friday at 4:45 Central African Time. SABC News, making you water-wise.
Welcome to the final hour. It's the final day of the ANC Policy Conference in Nasrec. The Social Transformation Subcommittee is currently briefing the media on their policy decisions reached during their deliberations behind closed doors. For the latest, we now go live.
We're dealing with. Ours is a social transformation issue. It is not as vibrant as most of the other commissions that you've been to, because we are all in agreement about what should be done to transform our society. What we wanted to put across very early on in the session is that when we talk about social transformation, it is almost like it is secondary to economic transformation, when in fact it is a first-generation right, social rights. It is the underbelly of our Freedom Charter, and it is also part of what we are wanting to drive to ensure that we change from what we found in this country to what the kind of country that we would like to have. So we would like at all times that our people understand that it is a radical socio-economic transformation that we agreed to at the 53rd Congress of the ANC. Beyond that, we then deal with the issues that concern us, and we put across the background of the society that we are talking about and how far we are in changing it from what we found to where we would like to be in the future. We acknowledge the fact that government has done exceedingly well on the delivery of services in this sector. However, we're very concerned about the breakdown of the social fabric of our society. This is one area which remains a stubbornly backward in the way that we define it, and we've been concerned about that. So naturally, we went to those areas that are still outstanding in the work that we should be doing as an organization in ensuring that we can completely transform our society. Those areas have to do with the creation of a national identity so that we all relate to the country, to each other as one. We deal with the issues of the breakdown of our social fabric, especially as we look at the rise in crime, especially as we look at the violation of the rights of women and children and other vulnerable people. We have looked at the issue of the vulnerable people that remain outside of our main focus, such as people living with disability. And we go on to see how we can reflect in this society what we would like to see a few years from now. And what we have here are a whole lot of recommendations that we are taking back to our communities, so that by the time we have the 54th Congress possibly here in Nasrec. We will have refined this and we will adopt this as the basis of how we intend to transform our society. Okay. Zizi Kodwa would like me to read some of the highlights to you because you clearly do not have the document. And I will proceed to do so. We would like all branches of the ANC to be effective agents of change as leaders in our communities. We would like to see that the ANC is at the forefront of radical social transformation and our agenda to achieve social cohesion and national building. To this end, we would like to urge all ANC members to be exemplary in their conduct and make sure that at all times they reflect what the ANC ideology is and reflect the fact that we as ANC members are leaders of society. We would like to make sure that ANC branches be clear on the difference between the ANC national anthem and the African national anthem. We feel that it is important that we stress this because it is a very important part of our social cohesion. And we started off our session yesterday with singing the national anthem in its proper format. There was also a feeling that we should increase our local content, especially as we deal with the education of our citizens. That quite a lot of the time that we are on radio and in other broadcast areas, we do not take into consideration local content. And this is also applicable to our libraries. We have recognized that we have libraries in most parts, that we would like to have libraries, but most of the books in our libraries are not reflective of the people of this country or the culture of this country. And we would like to make sure that that is corrected. We would like to strengthen our relationship at the ANC branch with faith-based organizations, sporting organizations, so as to ensure that all of these things that underpin social cohesion are within reach of our communities and our branches. We would like to ensure that we legislate against hate crime. That hate crime be legislated as a priority legislation. In this case, we would be in a difficulty because we have to first confront the fact that we have not yet got beyond dealing with the issue of racism. So we spend a lot of time dealing with the issue of racism. How do we define racism? How do we, it is one of those intangibles that we still are trying to pin down. However, we believe that by the time we've pinned it down, we've got to legislate against racism. We've got to also make sure that we understand it in all its, in all its finery and in all its newest manifestation. We're also very concerned about the possibility that as we do this, we're not paying attention to the resurgence of tribalism. We're concerned about patriarchy. We believe that if we're going to have a truly transformed society, then we've got to deal with patriarchy. We've got to make sure that our children grow up in a society where all are equal and all are respected and all have the normal respect that we should have. We believe that we would like to have this as part of our syllabus so that people understand what patriarchy is, and in the same way as we would like them to understand what racism is. Those are two evils that we would like to put behind us. As we look at the breakdown of our social fabric, we've been particularly concerned about the rising crime against women, and especially girl children. We've been analyzing this, and we view it with abhorrence. That we have this kind of society that is beginning to turn against women in their vulnerability, and especially the girl child. And we've taken this as a priority matter for ourselves to ensure that we have sufficient protection for girl children in this space that we're in. What we've done is we have resolved that as the ANC, we've got to work out village and street communities. We know where we have girl children that might be vulnerable, and we are going to launch a campaign of Know Your Neighbor so that we feel protected in our neighborhood, and when there is any vulnerable child in our neighborhood, somebody would know about it. And we would like to make sure that for every area that we have, every community that we have what is called a safe house. We would like to change the name of safe houses and call them houses for survivors. We're going to call them survival houses for survivors, and we would like to make sure that we have enough social workers there to assist people who are in distress. We analyze the phenomenon where women suffer domestic violence, and this is something that is beyond the immediate reach of our policing agencies. They report this, and soon thereafter are back in the same fold, and it is a recurring crime. We would like to find that we have other ways of dealing with this particular matter of domestic violence, where women are empowered to stand up and ensure that they are able to look after their children and protect their children, which is why we're wanting to make sure that we can ensure a greater number of women in our community policing forums. We are still concerned about place names, and we would like to fast-track the renaming of offensive names in our neighborhood. We would like to bring to the attention of the ANC that when we talk about vulnerability, it is not only vulnerability of young women and young women, but it is also the vulnerability of LGBTIQ communities, and we've got to put into that albinism. It has not been in our vocabulary, but we would like to put it in our vocabulary. These are vulnerable people that need the protection of society. And we would like to make sure that any antisocial beliefs that are creeping in are dealt with as a crime. An example of this antisocial belief is that which is traditionally referred to as traditional solutions to protection against crime. It is believed, and perhaps this the President will himself confirm, that there is a rise in Eastern Pondoland of gangsterism that believes that if they have committed a crime, the only way they would be invisible to the police is by sucking out the blood of a woman. And in that way, they would be... as Zizi says, rewind, erase. But I was...
I know I'm a vampire. I know those vampires.
Look, it was just one example. What we're saying is that all backward forms of traditional beliefs must be dealt with, because if they have negative consequences, then we have the rise of something like this. We have looked at the policies that we have had in the past, and they've been very good policies, and the delivery has been very good. But in those areas where we have not delivered, we find that it is because of lack of a mechanism of monitoring. Good policies do not on their own produce good results, but we must make sure that they are properly monitored and we're able to evaluate the delivery that comes out of those good policies. We are concerned about the rise in racial tensions in some areas. We are concerned about the issue of xenophobia, as you saw in the previous 2 years. We are concerned about those people that find themselves unprotected by our society, and we would like to get to the bottom of this and make sure that everybody who lives in South Africa has a better life and feels protected. We are concerned about poverty. Poverty is continuing to be a concern because we believe that most of the social ills that we are experiencing is as a result of poverty and lack of employment, especially for the youth. This is where we find the root cause of where we are right now. So we're wanting to make sure that we can deal with poverty, we can deal with employment, especially amongst the youth. However, in areas where we deal with matters that are cross-cutting with other sectors, we have referred those matters to the economic sector. But we are very concerned about the huge unemployment in youth, and we find that this is a part of the cause for why they are so antisocial sometimes and why they resort to antisocial behavior. We're also concerned about those matters that add to the antisocial behavior of our youth, like taverns near schools or taverns in locations of where our communities should be living. Members of the media, we have a very long list of recommendations. As you can expect, this is something that touches every delegate. Every delegate comes from a community, and every community has a problem. And every delegate has come here with a problem that their community is experiencing, and we have noted this, and we're attending it, and we have grouped them in relation to how we are going to ensure that they are dealt with. And we're going to ask Zizi to make the document available to you so that if there are any questions, we're ready to tackle them. But basically, this is the underbelly of what the Freedom Charter intended us to deal with. When the Freedom Charter was adopted, every household was asked, what is it that you would like to see changed in the kind of society we would like to build after this? And when they compiled this, it was what affected them most. And therefore, we've given ourselves a great deal of time. We had 2 commissions dealing with this very extensively. We had very robust discussions, robust but very focused around how do we ensure that we can truly create a better life for all our people. And we're going to ensure that this is given to you. We are also wanting children's courts as one of the matters that has arisen, specialized children's courts. And we would like to make sure that those matters that deal with children's criminality against children or violence against children to be prioritized. An example was made of how children will go to court and their cases are postponed, and 6 months later they have to relive the experience of having been violated. And we believe this is not good, and we would like to urge the justice sector to ensure that violence against children cases be prioritized. We would like to make sure that children's courts are separate from normal courts and dealt with in a particular way. There is a suggestion that we pay particular attention to child-headed household, and that in these particular cases, the child support grant should be extended from age 18 to 21, provided that the beneficiaries are still studying. I'll leave the rest then to Comrade Buti to deal with matters that I have not dealt with right now.
Thank you. I think just some brief additions. There was a strong view from the conference that we need to put in legislation, strong legislation that will deal with people who damage public property, and that we must also educate the public on the consequences of damaging public property. I think we've seen recently where communities protesting, and as part of those protests, we've seen destruction of schools and other public properties. And we really want to, call on all our communities to ensure that the least that we could do is to protect those institutions. Secondly, that we see education, sports, recreation, arts and culture, and heritage activities, clubs, and other programs as very central towards social cohesion and nation building. And that we will be ensuring that the ANC government puts in resources towards these programs as part of promoting social cohesion and nation building. And then there was a proposal that the ANC men must be visible in the 365 days campaign against, for violence against women and children, and that in August, this was a proposal that was adopted, that in August 2017, ANC branches should all hold men's marches against violence against women and children under the banner of "Not in my name, count me out," and that drastic measures should be taken against perpetrators, and a message that the ANC cares for women and children should be a part of the central message. There was also strong proposals around the social challenges of racial tensions, xenophobia, violence against women, children and other vulnerable groupings. And then the effective resourcing of government structures to fulfill their functions must be focused on, and in particular the municipal infrastructure grant and the urban settlement development grant contribution to sports and recreation. And there was a proposal for this to be ring-fenced, and 15 to 20% of the budget targeted at that, especially most of the structures from the countryside or the rural areas would raise this matter quite sharply, that this would help in funding infrastructure that's relating to sports and other facilities. Then there was again the call around the need to have compulsory provision of sanitary towels to girls and women by the state, starting with the indigent girl and learners, and the zero rating for sanitary products. Then the whole question of the abuse of religion. I think we've all seen churches that spray people with doom and people being made to eat grass and all of that, and that there must be legislation to try and regulate and curb this unethical and abusive churches, or the abusing of traditional and religious practices for the benefit of individuals. Then the NYDA must be strengthened and also be financially resourced so that it delivers effective youth programs together with or that includes the National Youth Service, the Extended Public Works Program targeting youth, and other youth employment programs as flagships of youth development in government, and that consideration should be given towards the young pioneers and also the Masupa Tsila. And I think finally around human settlement, transformatory urban planning should aim at changing the apartheid spatial residential patterns, and that we need to build integrated cities. I think we all know that the face of human settlement in our country has not significantly changed. There are still areas that are designated in terms of racial groupings, and that the human settlement spatial development plan should be focused at deracializing our communities. And I think quite a strong point raised around the fact that people spend more money going and more time going to work and other recreational facilities because of the apartheid spatial development, and that this is one of the things that that needs to be looked at. And finally, that human settlement would be looking at setting aside 30%, which would benefit designated groups in terms of their housing program that includes women, youth, military veterans, and also people with disabilities. So in a nutshell, those are some of the proposals that are going to be taken back to branches for further discussions and finalization at the National Conference at the end of the year.
Yes, in addition, on the issue of human settlements, we have a resolution here, and I hope that it is adopted, that all state land and public land within the precincts of the city or within easy access of the city should first be given to human settlements before any consideration of sale of that land. Where possible, we will use the expropriation instrument to ensure that all unused building is turned in the inner city is turned into residential units, and in this way we will also be able to accommodate students that are in that particular area. Finally, when you have your document, you will find an issue which has arisen in the plenary as a contentious issue. The province of Gauteng has proposed to us that we decriminalize sex workers, and we put it across as a proposal and a recommendation until we found that the plenary is not too happy with that proposal. And in the discussions that we had actually indicated that before we have something placed before a conference, it should have gone through the necessary discussions that we have in the Social Transformation Committee. And this one was sprung on us at conference without going through the necessary process of consultation. So we did expect that we would have a fallout with plenary. So when you come across your documentation and there is this matter of sex workers being, their work being decriminalized, it is a proposition from Gauteng. It has not yet been proposed, and we will in time withdraw that. Gauteng feels that we are unduly harsh on people who are trying to make a living, and that it is the men who should be criminalized for what they do, because from Gauteng's perspective, this is an executive pleasure resort. So the proposal is to change it around so that we criminalize what the men do as opposed to what the women do. That is the proposal you will find in the documentation.
Already you've got somebody supporting it. Thank you very much.
She's from Gauteng.
I'm sure she's from Gauteng. Any questions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 hands. Then I'll take more hands. Next question. Next commission. So, Juanita.
Thank you very much, Juanita Hunter from the Sunday Times. I just have 2 questions. The first one is at Minister Sisulu. We know that the controversial issue of this conference has been the fact that there were males included in the ANC Women's League delegation. And I know that they sort of contradicted the part where they said they needed them because they were women get too emotional.
Thank you.
But
Start again. I think
okay, I said my first question to Minister Sisulu is about the fact that there were men that were added to the delegation of the Women's League. And you've spoken out a bit about patriarchy and sexism that persist. What does it do, in your opinion, to the advancement of women's rights for a women's organization to reach out to the expertise of males to bolster their argument? That's number one. The second question is, has this Commission on Social Transformation considered the fiscal consequences of increasing the social grants, because currently we have 17 million people on social grants, and can the country afford it in the wake of the recession and other economic difficulties? Thank you.
Good morning, Fariel. We haven't seen you in a long time. Thanks for coming. Your guys have been keeping us on our toes. You proceed, sir.
Tusokumalo ARD German Radio. On social cohesion, what were the specific recommendations around xenophobic violence? Seeing that since 2008, a lot of measures have been taken, but it continues to come up with a lot of complaints around the perceived government's failure to act in time before lives and property is lost, and also bring those who perpetrated to book, and others also alleging the government is failing to properly control illegal immigration. Thank you.
Pass it right in the back. There's a young chap from Mail and Guardian.
Thank you. It's Govan Whittles from the Mail and Guardian. What was the policy conference's analysis of drugs such as Nyaupe, Duk, and Mandrax, and the impact it has on family relationships? And then secondly, were there any discussions about the proliferation of homeless people in our country, particularly homeless young people, and what does the ANC think we should do about that? Thank you.
There was a hand here. Yes. Thabo?
Thabo Shwalamashao from How TV. Over the past few months or so, and I could be generous when I'm saying that we've seen an escalating number of reports on racist attacks and racism playing itself in society on various issues. And the majority of the receiving ends are obviously blacks and Africans in particular, which the ANC says that they are protecting. And also not too long ago, the NEC conceded that the racists seem to be emboldened, these attacks and so on. So was the agency expressed in commissions in terms of time frames on dealing with the anti-racism legislature and pinning it down, specifically because it is one of the biggest threats to social cohesion? Thank you.
Is that Colin Gambi? Welcome back. I know you've been away for days. The Politburo is in session now.
Thanks, Zizi. The question for me, Minister Colin Gambi from ENCA, is that it's reported that there's been a lot of robust debate in these commissions, but it would appear that things took an ugly turn when some people were said to have used language perhaps that might not have been liked by other delegates, and so people are threatened with being taken to disciplinary hearings. What has been your sense, or in particular in commissions such as the economic transformation one, and also what is the status of people who are in this conference who are said to be professionals, people like Luther Lebelo, who are said to have been very, very disruptive inside these commissions? What is their status? Because we understand they're not delegates per se. And then perhaps lastly, question has skipped my mind now. Oh, it regards the intimidation, Minister, because in the lead up to this conference, you were one of those people who were said to have been, who said to have received death threats. What would your sense be around just the safety and security aspect of this conference? Thanks.
Just to remind you, are dealing with social transformation.
It shows he's been absent.
Yeah, just to remind, we're dealing with social transformation. You can now answer.
I'm being taught language that is savvy and sensitive on issues that could otherwise be very problematic. So I'm learning with time. May I indicate that we did not have any disruptive elements in our committees. They were actually very buoyant, vibrant committees. Therefore, I would not be able to reflect on what was happening in the Economic Committee. The reason why we had such a vibrant, peaceful engagement is because the issues that we're dealing with are issues that are very fundamental to our people. Each delegate in there had brought with them something that they felt is absolutely first-generation right for all our people. Houses, water, basic needs, and safety, and all of those things. And there was very little that we were in disagreement about. So I think I will leave the issue of the Economic Transformation Committee to themselves when they come here if they haven't been. I'll answer some of these questions and give over to the Deputy Minister of Women here. You know,
It's been 72 exciting hours.
It has been 72 exciting hours for you. What do we say about men in women's delegations? Can I leave that to you to respond to?
Yeah, I'll leave it to somebody else.
You leave it to somebody else. No, we were not dealing with delegations. That is a matter for accreditation. We were dealing with the Social Transformation Committee, and the men who were there were duly delegated to deal with all the issues that we were discussing. Have we discussed the fiscal consequences of the work that we do? Yes, we're not on very good terms with people who manage finances in the state, because they say every time that the Social Transformation Committee meets, then they've got to be very worried about the increasing costs of what comes out of there. Enoch Godongwane in particular thinks that there should be some kind of representativity of the finance department in all our deliberations, so they keep us on point about the consequences of increasing grants and all of those things. However, what we have here is a report of the deliberations and what our people have brought forward for us to consider. We will then sit down when we put it together to work out whether this is affordable or not. We will have the affordability measurement at the point at which we're processing it for conference. But we are aware of that, but we did allow people to express themselves, and this is what we have brought to you. These are our people's wishes, and these are the recommendations. And the Mail and Guardian, yes, we did. I think it was, I erred in not mentioning this. One of the most serious crimes that we're dealing with is the rise in drug abuse, resulting in a whole lot of misdemeanor and antisocial behavior, especially from the young. And we've looked at this, and we have recommended that our social workers pay particular attention to this. We would like to ensure that we have greater number of centers that will help, rehabilitation centers to help people out of drug addiction. It is a serious, serious problem for us in our communities, especially in communities that are high-density communities. What are we doing about it? We are wanting to ensure that we have public education about this. We want harsher sentences for people who are peddling drugs or selling drugs, and we discuss this at length. What are we doing about accelerating the issue of racism? We have, dealing with racism. We have a bill before Parliament. We call it the Hate Crimes Bill, and it is serving before Parliament, and we will monitor the progress of the bill and ensure that it is accelerated and brought out to the public domain so that all of us engage with the contents of that bill. The disruptive nature, we've dealt with that. Yeah. But there are other matters on social cohesion here which you could deal with.
Thank you. I think the important thing is that the I mean, the Commission noted the fact that there is this emphasis on radical economic transformation, whereas the Mangaung Conference actually resolved on radical socio-economic transformation, because there's an interconnection between social transformation and economic transformation. And if you look at, for instance, the issue of, the whole range of issues that are being raised, they're not only about, social cohesion or the collapse of the social and moral fabric, but they also interlink to economic issues. I mean, if you speak about how long are we going to keep people in social grants, it's about how are they, integrated into the mainstream economy. Are they getting jobs? Are they becoming entrepreneurs and all of that? So that interlink was actually made by the Commission that, it's not only about social transformation, but it's about radical socio-economic transformation. If you look at issues of social cohesion and the issues around racism, for instance, and racism as a question of power and people, knowing that, being more emboldened, knowing that, you can call someone a baboon and there are no consequences. Or you can shoot someone and say you mistaken them for a pig and there are no consequences. It's a question of power. It's people who are weak, who've got no legislation that protects them, who have absolutely no trust in the fact that the justice system will protect them, who are vulnerable, and therefore, as opposed to or vis-a-vis people who have power, who are, owners of farms or owners of factories who victimize their workers and all of that. So that's why there was this emphasis around, the whole notion of a radical socio-economic transformation, and that this commission and its work is important in uplifting people, socially and all of that. Then the question of the fiscal consequences, and given the recession, obviously that's one of the things that will be looked at. But I think what came out strongly was, firstly, that extent that for people who are still studying, who are still in school, and those who are not between that age, link them to job opportunities or all the other opportunities that are available in government. It is not the desire of the ANC to keep people as long as possible within the social grant system, but it's also obviously not the desire of the ANC to see people die of hunger because they don't have means of subsistence. So obviously that balance would be made. And what else? Okay, yeah. I think our commission was not as exciting as.
No. It was very exciting.
No. I'm just saying in terms of some of the things that Koli was raising. It was not as exciting.
It was not as sexy as the economics.
Yes.
But very fundamental to us.
It wouldn't make the tabloids, but we're quite excited with how stimulating it was, intellectually, and it actually covered the business of the conference. Thank you.
May I add that the one report that all our communities will be looking forward to is this one, because it touches everybody's life. So that should put paid to exciting.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm taking my last 5 questions because this commission is ready and they have to go.
Yes.
Kalata, Ferriel, Pete. You still have to meet with the SC, you remember? Yes. 3, 4, 5, 6. Give it.
This is Kwanana la move baba.
Asking.
Yeah?
No. Pass. Okay, you can start.
Can I go? Okay, then thank you so much. Aldrin St-Pierre from SABC TV News. Just 3 questions quickly. Is it enough for the ANC Social Transformation Committee to be merely concerned on the issue of xenophobia, considering that the fatal impact that it has and the contestation that's currently happening? Are there plans in how do
us as South Africans deal with the issue of xenophobia. Minister, during your briefing last time, a note was sent to you, which was, if condoms are free, why aren't sanitary towels free? Has the Commission resolved on that? And the final question is, and I don't know whether this was part of the discussions, but if you drive around Gauteng, for instance, I don't know about the other provinces, if you drive around Gauteng and you look at our intersections, you find parents, mothers with toddlers who are 3, 2 years old and 5 years old. Why aren't we doing anything about that? Is that not a form of abuse?
Okay. Mrs. Pam, I think I need someone with walks faster.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Nicele. I'm from Equality News. I've got 2 easy questions. In fact, I need clarity on this. You spoke about libraries having books that don't reflect to the people of this country. What are you saying here? Can you spin more information? Are you saying you want to see 50-50 or another 90-10 in the libraries? Right, question 2. There's another hit and run point you made here. Proposal about 20% of the budget being targeted for the funding of the infrastructure. Now, the big question is, what are you going to do in those municipalities where you are in opposition? Thank you.
Please pass it to the parliamentary reporter from ANCA.
Thank you, Lester ANCA. Just taking my colleague Koli's question further. Under the scope of social cohesion, non-sexist, non-racist, but if we listen to reports of racial epithets being used in commissions, particularly to senior party leaders who just happen to be non-black, African or white, is the ANC still a home for all?
No, can I just protect the leadership in front? I suggest that we won't be able to comment on things that were set in commissions which are now reporting, which all of us were not in commissions.
But may I overrule? The ANC is a home for all.
No, the question was wrong.
Whatever the question, the ANC is a home for all. Please report that.
Pass to, yes.
Hi, I'm Ayanda Mdluli from the African Times. I'd just like to touch on the health issue. We find ourselves in a situation where our hospitals in South Africa are short in supply of doctors, but then we also have a situation where doctors are unemployed in the country as well. Has the Commission looked at this issue, and if you have, what is your position on that? And then also, we're in an economy where access to affordable housing is an issue, and the National Housing Finance Corporation was established to deal with this issue. Now, just looking at the issue of affordable housing, what other institutions are going to come together to try and address the problem of affordable housing, because we have a lot of people who don't have access in the gap markets to this. Thank you very much.
Hi, Niran Tulsi from the Mail and Guardian. Just on the housing issue, ma'am. Firstly, the use of state land here in the vicinity of cities. Does that mean that government is any closer to completing its audit of public-owned land and state-owned land? And if so, do you have any timelines around that? And secondly, the Constitutional Court ruled quite recently that before a court order for eviction can be handed down, alternative accommodation has to be established already for the people who would be moved. Has the ANC discussed other mechanisms around alternative accommodation which do not include temporary relocation areas, which, as you would know in the case of Blikkiesdorp, have been around for over 15 years and are really permanent relocation areas?
Please pass it to the front. Pass it.
I'll be very quick. Masaki Gana from Eyewitness News. 2 short questions. You spoke about singing the national anthem in its proper format. Is there any talk about changing it? And you also spoke about racism and its new manifestations. If you could please just give examples of this kind of new manifested racism.
The second question, please, Masaki. manifestation of racism.
Good day. I'm Shaba from Hillbrow Radio. Did the Commission overlook the problem that creates by public drinking to our communities, more especially playing a role on women and children abuse, whereby at the end of the day, men are also being abused by the cessation of public drinking? Thank you.
No, give it to Sipo. I don't want people to protest.
This one goes to Minister Sisulu. This is to do mostly about dress code, especially to our lovely women and daughters and whosoever. There's a social peak that has been all around in the social media of Mazota or Zot. How do you work on those kind of incident? Or?
But why don't you ask me instead?
What picture is this?
This is mostly about
why do you
dress
think I'm
code
not
of
qualified?
women in public places like that one, which actually have been shown all over the social media.
I'll show you.
How do you respond
Show
on
me
that
the
one?
picture.
Pass, just a reminder again, pass to Pete and then Ferrer, your last hand. We're still on social transformation. Before we talk about Pete.
Good day. Lungane Mhlongo from Kasi FM. My question, what is the view of the Commission with regards to the clarion call made by South Africans about to regulate social media? We've seen many people in Guamashu dying because of fake news that was broken in social media. So what is your view as ANC?
Fake news.
We're still in social transformation. Kalana?
Thank you very much. Lukhanyo Kalata from the SABC. My question just centers around the issue of socio-economic transformation and how much discussion went into the issue of entrepreneurship and encouraging that within the communities. We know that South Africa, the youth is unemployed, and everybody in the economy isn't growing fast enough to be able to absorb and create the jobs that are needed. So how much are our youth actually encouraged and assisted to develop their own businesses and pursue an entrepreneurial line? Thank you very much.
Ferrer?
Ferrell Afuji from the Huffington Post. Good morning. I'm just checking whether radical socio-economic transformation has replaced radical economic transformation as the key campaign of the conference, and what's the difference between the two? My colleague here asked if you have an indication of hate crimes law. What are the kinds of sentences you're looking for on them?
Yeah. Pete.
Thank you, Zizi. Peter de Tooy from Huffington Post. Minister Sisulu, you said the Commission was concerned about poverty, unemployment, and the social ills it brings. We've now seen a number of reports the last couple of weeks about state capture and corruption and the impact thereof. A report recently about an economic development project where taxpayers' money was diverted to fund the Gupta's wedding. Was this discussed, the impact of state capture and corruption on unemployment, the poor, and the indigent? Thanks.
If there's one person who has been very consistent and coherent in asking one question, very consistent, I must say that. Great, we can now take questions. Pete.
If there's one person who has been consistent and coherent about an answer, it has been given by me. Can we stop at that, to Pete? No? Okay, all right, then we will come back to that. You don't want me leaning over? I'm this. On the issue of whether or not sanitary towels, which was an issue we made an example of when we gave a press briefing on this matter, yes, we have agreed that sanitary towels for people at school should be free. On the issue of local content in the libraries, did we put a percentage to it? No, we did not put a percentage to it. We just noted the fact that while we have made advances in establishing libraries, which was part of our resolution in the 53rd conference, we are still struggling to ensure that there is sufficient representation of African literature in and works in our libraries, but there is no percentage yet. On the issue of the percentage of the infrastructure that should be given to municipalities to ensure that there are sufficient facilities for sports grounds and community halls, we took in a proposal that had something like 15 to 20% of the municipal infrastructure grant. However, we do not encourage our conference to determine the budgetary outcomes and allocations that government is responsible for. We have the necessary procedures for that. But we have got a percentage that we would like ring-fenced in our municipal infrastructure grant to ensure that in the rural areas, particularly, there is sufficient infrastructure for sport. We feel that sport will then play a very important role in social cohesion. It has in the past. We would like to encourage that it continues to do so. What we forgot to indicate is that we have now agreed that physical education will be compulsory in all our schools. Is the ANC home for all? It is home for everybody. Please underline that. That is the message from social transformation. This is how we're going to transform our society. That is the foundation of what we believe in. Then what are we doing about the issue of medical facilities? We discussed that matter, and especially the shortage of doctors, and we noted that because a number of our delegates complained about this matter, and we have referred it to the Education and Health Committee. What we do is take in all the recommendations that come from our delegates, and when they fall outside of our own responsibility, we delegate it to the correct commission. So that will be dealt with by the Education and Health Commission when you do find them. What are we doing about the issue of affordable housing? We have established in government a housing, a human settlements bank, which we hope will deal with the issue of the missing gap and assist people to access affordable housing. And on the issue of us proclaiming that we are going to take over all the land that belongs to the state and public land within the precincts of the city or within easy access to the city, the question was, has government completed its audit? No. Even as government has not completed its audit, we are aware of land right now that belongs to the state or that is public land, and where we find that it is not in our hands, we are considering the instrument of expropriating that land. We want to make sure that cities truly represent what South Africa should be, integrated and with all the facilities and amenities open to all, and where people who are employed in the city have easy access to their workplace and have easy access to other amenities offered by the city. Temporary accommodation is a policy of government, and I think the problem that we are suffering from is monitoring some of the ways in which our policies are carried out. And Blikkiesdorp is one of them, and we're going to make sure that we can get back to that. What we're talking about here are general issues that still continue to be a problem to our society. We didn't go into particular details such as is mentioned here now. The national anthem, yes, we insisted on singing the national anthem because at the opening of our session of this conference, we had the Nkosi Sikelel' Sontonga hymn sung as opposed to the national anthem. And when we got to our commissions, we felt that perhaps we needed to ensure that we insist that it is the national anthem that is sung at all times, because we hang on to some of these issues as part of that which provides a social cohesion vehicle for us. Abuse of men, shall I leave that to you? and entrepreneurship from Talata. What are we doing about that, especially for the youth? Ferial, what do we define as hate crimes? We will come back to that later on. And what sentences did we propose? We have not proposed minimum sentences for that. But what we did do is propose minimum sentences for violence against women. And we said it should be between 15 and 20 years. And I do know some women said lock them up forever, but we tried to be very rational, and 15 and 20 is what we have in our documentation. Buti?
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, on the issue of corruption, yes, we've been very strong on the issue of corruption. It is a very corrosive matter in our society, and it has actually created this trust deficit between society and government. And where we are concerned as social transformation, we would like to make sure that this is frowned upon by everybody, because it is what we think antisocial behavior at the very least. And if you will allow us to stop at that, we are an anti-corruption force in social transformation.
Yeah. Okay. I think firstly the question around sanitary towels and condoms, I think the feeling is that we should stop comparing the two. I think there's been this unfair comparison around, yes, you're providing free condoms, why are you not providing free sanitary towels? So although we've resolved that the state should provide free sanitary towels, but we think that it stereotypes the availability of free condoms wherever they are available, to mean that they are condoms for boys or for men, whereas condoms are and should be used for the protection of those who are involved in the sexual activity. So I think the comparison of, you providing condoms but you're not providing sanitary towels is not a justifiable comparison. The two should not be regarded as being equal. Okay. And then the question of the homeless centers, and the increase in homelessness, and all of the state does provide shelter for the homeless, and also foster care homes for the homeless also. That may not be enough, but I think the social development is doing as much as it can to ensure that there is that. And then I think linked to the question around the national anthem was the discussion whether it will be changed. No, there was no discussion around whether we will change the national anthem. And then the public drinking and its effects on violence against women and children. Well, the question is the abuse of alcohol and other substances, whether consumed privately or publicly. And I think that's what the Commission raised as a concern, a big cause for concern. And I think there was also discussion around the policy that is in discussion in government around the use and abuse of alcohol, and that that needs to be accelerated. The entrepreneurship, yes, as part of the increase in funding for the NYDA, part of the focus of or what it should be focusing on is to promote youth entrepreneurship or interest for young people in entrepreneurship. In fact, our major concern is that the interest of young people in taking up jobs, in taking up entrepreneurial initiatives, is actually on the decline on economies of our scale, and that we really need to be encouraging more and more young people to pursue entrepreneurship. In fact, most graduates would rather join the unemployed the queue of the unemployed, rather than use the skills and their qualifications to see themselves as creators of jobs. So we think that we really need to be changing that mentality, and there are resources, funds made available throughout government to support youth entrepreneurship, but we believe that more needs to be done in that regard. And I think finally the question of the racial epithet, I think the racial epithets which were raised in some of the commission, I think that would be regrettable, and I think as emphasized by Comrade Sisulu, that the ANC is a home for all. It would be regrettable if people are not engaged on the basis of their views, but on the basis of their age, gender, racial, or religious, or whatever belief that they have. And I think it's obviously condemnable. The dress code. I mean, we yeah, she's. But I think the point is that, as there's been a lot of justification of violence against women on the basis of, or allegedly on the basis of what they wear. And I think it would be unfortunate if we would want to be seen to be regulating what people should wear and all of that. People are free to wear that which they believe, fully expresses who they are, without any fear of being publicly shamed for what they're wearing, or without any danger of them being violently abused, or in whatever form. And I think that's important. We've had stories of women being sexually abused because they apparently asked for it based on what they were wearing. So we don't think that it's in our business to be regulating what people should be or how people should be dressed.
There was a question here about abuse of men.